At the charity gala, my son stepped onto the stage, raised his glass, and smirked down at the investors. I left that poor last name behind so I could rise, he said. No $1 million brand wants to be tied to an old man who scrubs floors at night. Laughter spread across the room. I sat near the stage in my old maintenance uniform, my chest tightening, but my hands stayed calm. I didn't interrupt. I didn't defend myself. Because before the night ended, that very microphone would destroy everything he thought he had won. This story begins quietly, but won't leave you unchanged. Before we dive in, drop a quick comment. Have you ever been underestimated because of your job or background? Yes or no? Your perspective might be exactly what someone else needs today. Quick note, some details have been adapted for storytelling. What truly matters is the lesson this carries. The words hit me like a freight train at 2 in the morning. I stopped introducing myself as the son of a night janitor the second I walked into rooms with big money. I stood frozen in the Union Station staff break room, my coffee halfway to my lips, watching the face on the television screen. At 68, I'd pushed my industrial floor buffer across this cold limestone terminal, for 30 years invisible to the midnight commuters, rushing past my weathered hands, steady from decades of honest work. But the man on that podcast screen made invisibility feel like a weapon pointed directly at me. Nico Saxon. 34 years old, tailored charcoal suit, every polished inch the self-made tech billionaire he'd reinvented himself to be. The name Riddle erased from every professional profile. My son. That's how you scale. Nico continued, leaning forward with the confidence of someone who'd never doubted a word leaving his mouth. You outgrow the story you were born into. Maverick Maxwell. The podcast host, visible on screen, leaned in with the predatory enthusiasm of a content creator who'd just captured viral gold. So you're saying your background became a liability? Not a liability, Nico corrected smoothly. Just irrelevant to the room I needed to occupy. The 3 co-workers who'd been eating their midnight lunches fell into the kind of silence that makes air feel thick. Eyes darted between the television and me. Gloria from maintenance shifted in her seat. Marcus pretended to be very interested in his sandwich wrapper. Lester Bye. We didn't know he was gonna... Gloria started, her voice trailing off into the awkward space between pity and embarrassment. I set down my coffee with the same methodical care I'd used to raise that boy to work double shifts when Pearl got sick to never miss a mortgage payment or a parent-teacher conference. The remote sat on the break room table. I picked it up, pressed the power button, and watched the screen go dark. The floor in Terminal B needs finishing before the morning commute, I said quietly. Marcus opened his mouth like he wanted to say something, then closed it. I walked out of that break room with my back straight and my pace even the way Pearl taught me. Her voice echoed in my memory from those final months before cancer took her in March. Her gentle wisdom about patience and dignity, the anchor I'd clung to ever since. Patience builds stronger foundations than anger ever could. She used to say, her hand warm in mine, even when the chemo made her cold. I returned to my buffer in the main terminal, the familiar hum of the machine, a comfort against the echo of my son's words. The night stretched ahead like it always did, floors to clean, windows to polish the invisible work that kept the city moving. 6 hours later, I stood in my small house near the rail yard, watching my phone light up like a Christmas tree gone haywire. Text after text, the vibrations rattling the kitchen table. From Marcus. Lester, this is blowing up everywhere. That tech CEO is your boy. From Gloria, just saw the honorary wall photo match. We got your back, brother. From numbers I didn't recognize. Links, screenshots. The podcast clip sliced into a 90-second viral video with the title, Outgrow the Story You Were Born Into. I clicked one link. The view count climbed in real time. 47,000. 48,000. Comments flooded in faster than I could read them. Then someone posted a photo. The Union Station honorary wall of service. My face 30 years younger, but still recognizable. My name in bronze letters, Lester Riddle. Night Custodian, 1993 to 2023. The connection spread through the comments like wildfire. Wait as the night janitor, he's talking about this guy. Bro literally has his dad's face on the wall of honor and still threw him under the bus. Imagine working 30 years at the same place and your son acts like you're an embarrassment. How do you measure the weight of a name? In my son's world, you measure it in investor confidence and boardroom invitations. In mine, you measure it in 30 years of honest work and calloused hands that built his college fund, that paid for the coding boot camp that launched his career, that never once asked for recognition or apology. I sat at my kitchen table as the November morning light filtered through the curtains Pearl had sewn 15 years ago. The house was quiet, too quiet, the kind of quiet that makes a man think about the choices his children make and the distance that grows when pride replaces gratitude. My phone buzzed again, another text from the night shift group chat, full of support and outrage on my behalf. Good people. People who understood that dignity isn't something you outgrow, it's something you earn one honest shift at a time. But underneath the messages of solidarity, underneath the viral chaos my son had created, something else stirred in my chest. Not anger, not even hurt, really. Just a quiet certainty that Pearl's wisdom about patience was about to be tested in ways I hadn't anticipated. The view count hit 200,000. My son had no idea what he'd just set in motion. But what Nico didn't know, what none of them knew, not the podcast host, or the investors, or the people sharing that clip, was that the invisible janitor they'd dismissed held something far more valuable than a title or a corner office. I walked to my bedroom, the floorboards creaking under my work boots. My phone buzzed one more time. I glanced at the screen, expecting another message from the crew. Instead, an unlisted landline number appeared. No name, no area code I recognized. Just a string of encrypted numbers and a single line of text that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. You are the custodian of the key. Look to your perimeter. I stared at those words for a long moment. Someone knew something about me that even my son had never discovered. Someone was watching, waiting. I knelt beside my bed and pulled back the corner of the worn rug Pearl and I had bought at a flea market in 1995. The loose floorboard underneath had kept our secrets for decades. Time to see if those secrets were about to become weapons. The weathered rug pulled back, the hidden floorboard pried loose, and there it sat, the combination safe that held the answer to that cryptic text message. My fingers knew the numbers by heart. Pearl's birthday, then mine, then the day we married. The lock clicked open with the same solid precision it had 30 years ago, when we'd installed it together, her hands guiding mine as we fitted it into the space she'd insisted we needed. "This isn't your money, Lester," she'd said then, her voice firm despite the fatigue that already hinted at the cancer we didn't know was coming. "It's a promise to every person who works in the shadows. Protect it." Inside the safe, pristine legal documents waited in their fireproof sleeve. I lifted them out with the same careful hands that had buffed floors for 3 decades, laid them on my bed, and began to read. The Riddle Family Legacy Trust. Active. Current valuation $38 million. I'd looked at these papers 1,000 times since Pearl passed in March. I'd memorized every clause, every stipulation, every protection she'd helped our attorney build into the structure. But reading them now, with my son's voice still echoing in my head about outgrowing the story he was born into, the words took on a different weight. Section 4, subsection B, the honor and integrity parameters. Beneficiaries must bear the family surname with dignity and pride, demonstrating through public action their commitment to the values of honest labor and working-class stewardship. Any beneficiary who legally abandons the family name publicly disparages the trust grantor's occupation or heritage, or demonstrates contempt for working-class communities, shall be immediately and permanently disqualified from all distributions. I read it again, then a third time. Nico had changed his legal name to Saxon 5 years ago. I'd received the court notification, filed it away, told myself it was just business branding, nothing personal. Then came the public mockery on that podcast broadcast to hundreds of thousands of listeners, now millions with the viral clip. He'd violated every single parameter. The irony hit me like a punch to the gut. My son had spent years building a Silicon Valley empire, networking with billionaires, crafting the perfect, self-made mythology. And in doing so, he'd voluntarily walked away from $38 million he never knew existed. He threw away a fortune for an image consultant's advice. I said aloud to the empty bedroom, my voice steady despite the chaos in my chest. What do you call a man who changes his name to escape a fortune he didn't know existed? In my son's case, you call him precisely what he wanted to become, someone else's son. I sat on the edge of my bed, the legal documents spread before me like a map of choices made and consequences coming. Pearl had known this day might arrive. She'd insisted on those honor clauses worked with our attorney for months to make them ironclad bulletproof against challenge. Wood shaped with patience becomes a masterpiece, she used to say in the garage workshop where I'd learned to work with my hands. Wood forced too quickly splinters beyond repair. The November afternoon light filtered through the curtains, casting shadows across the trust documents. Outside the rail yard hummed with its familiar rhythm. Inside I made my decision. By 9:15 that evening I sat in my garage workshop, the smell of old wood and mineral oil familiar as breathing. My worn night shift logbook lay open on the workbench, and I wrote my governing principle in careful block letters. Never retaliate out of anger, correct through absolute truth. Then I picked up my phone and dialed the number I'd known by heart for 30 years. Lester Cass. Craig Morgan answered on the second ring, his voice carrying the quiet competence of a man who'd handled the Riddle family's legal matters since before Nico was born. At 56, Craig had built his practice on representing working people, the attorney Pearl had trusted to structure the trust's unbreakable honor clauses. I saw the viral video. I've been waiting for your call. Then you know why I'm calling, I said. It's time. I need you to activate the protective honor enforcement clauses we built into the trust structure. A long pause. I heard papers rustling on his end, the sound of a file being opened. Lester, if they catch wind of this, they will try to file an incapacity petition. Craig said, his tone shifting to the careful precision he used when explaining legal danger. They'll claim viral media stress has made you cognitively unfit to manage $38 million. Your son's new father-in-law has the resources to make that happen fast. I'd expected this. Pearl had warned me about it years ago when we'd first established the trust. Old money didn't like losing, and Eugene Saxon represented the worst kind of old money, the kind that saw working people as assets to be managed or obstacles to be removed. Then we need to build our legal foundation before they even know what we're protecting, I said. Agreed. I'll need 48 hours to pull together documentation. Court filings for the name change certified copies of the podcast, transcript the viral analytics showing deliberate public disparagement. We'll need medical evaluations proving your cognitive fitness, financial records, showing your competent management of the trust assets. Craig paused and I heard him take a breath. Lester, you understand what this means? Once we activate those clauses, once we make this official, there's no walking it back. Your son will know about the trust. His wife will know. Eugene will know. And they will come at you with everything they have. Pearl used to say that wood shaped with patience could become a masterpiece. But wood forced too quickly would splinter beyond repair. I was about to test whether the same principle applied to teaching lessons about honor. I know, I said quietly, but Pearl didn't build those clauses to sit unused. She built them to protect a promise. To every person who works in the shadows. Craig finished quoting the trust's preamble from memory. All right, I'll start the pulling records tomorrow morning. But Lester, I need you to understand something. If they file that incapacity petition before we're ready, if they get a friendly judge, they could freeze your trustee authority before you can act. We're in a race now. I looked at my logbook at the principle I'd just written. Never retaliate out of anger. Correct through absolute truth. Then we'd better move fast, I said. They will try to strip your trustee status. I know. So let's make sure they fail. The battle lines were drawn before my son even knew there was a war. Craig didn't waste time. 4 days later, his high-speed scanner whirred steadily in his downtown Denver office as it pulled every digital fingerprint buried in the podcast's production metadata. I sat across from his desk watching the screen fill with file names, timestamps, email headers. The machinery of modern investigation pulling apart what people thought they'd hidden in the noise of the internet. Here, Craig said, tapping the monitor. Email chain between Maverick Maxwell and a PR consulting firm, sent 3 days before the podcast aired. He clicked open the message. I leaned forward to read the text that made my jaw tighten. Keep the night janitor segment in the final edit. It's guaranteed. Ragebait metrics. Craig read aloud. The CEO's ruthless personal brand evolution will play beautifully with our Series B investors. Client approval required before broadcast. The room went quiet except for the hum of the scanner. So my son didn't just allow the insult? I said slowly. Someone paid to make sure it stayed in. Craig nodded, his expression grim. He pulled up another document, a corporate filing dense with legal language. This PR firm, Apex Brand Solutions, is a subsidiary of Saxon Capital Ventures. He said, tapping the screen where the ownership structure branched like roots. Your son's father-in-law orchestrated his own son-in-law, publicly destroying you for content marketing. I stared at the filing. Eugene Saxon. The name had appeared in my research after Nico married Saskia 3 years ago. Old money investment capital, the kind of wealth that bought influence like other people bought groceries. Eugene knew this would go viral. Craig continued. He knew it would make Nico look ruthless, decisive, willing to cut ties with anything that didn't serve his ambition. That's the brand image venture capitalists pay for. The weight of it settled over me like the dust that accumulated on Union Station's high windows, the kind you could only see when light hit it just right. My son hadn't stumbled into humiliating me. He'd been guided there by a man who understood that cruelty packaged correctly could be sold as strength. Can we use this? I asked. Craig nodded. In the right context, absolutely. This proves malicious intent orchestrated reputational damage. If they file that incapacity petition, we can demonstrate that the viral stress they'll claim made you unfit was manufactured deliberately by Eugene's own company. Who profits when a father becomes content? The podcast host gets his viral clicks, the PR firm collects its consulting fee, and my son gets his investor-friendly image as a man ruthless enough to discard his own roots for success. Everyone wins except the invisible janitor who becomes the raw material for someone else's brand evolution. Print everything I said. Every email, every corporate filing, every metadata tag. If we're building a legal foundation, I want it earthquake-proof. Craig's printer hummed to life. The following evening, I was replacing a rotted board on my front porch when a silver sedan pulled up to the curb. The woman who stepped out moved with the purposeful stride of someone who'd knocked on 1,000 doors and knew exactly how to read the answer in the first 3 seconds. She was 49, maybe 50, wearing a practical jacket and carrying a leather messenger bag that had seen years of use. Her face carried the sharp intelligence of someone who'd spent 2 decades covering labor stories the mainstream media ignored. Mr. Riddle, she said, not as a question. I set down my hammer, straightened up. You've got the wrong house. Tanya Henderson, she said, offering a business card I didn't take. Investigative reporter, I'm not here to add to your pain, but someone is profiting from weaponizing family relationships for viral metrics. That's the story I'm tracking. I studied her face. No camera crew, no photographer lurking by the car, just a woman with a notebook and questions. Then track the people manufacturing the weapons. I said quietly, not the people they're aimed at. Something shifted in her expression. Respect, maybe. Recognition. The honorary wall match took me 6 hours to confirm, she said. I've been sitting on it for 2 days because something about this whole situation felt wrong. The timing, the viral velocity, the way it blew up so perfectly for everyone except you. And now you're here to get confirmation, I said. I'm here to tell you I'm not running that confirmation, Tanya said, setting her card on the porch railing when I still wouldn't take it. But I am investigating who engineered this. The anonymous foundation that just incorporated in Denver. The PR firms involved in the podcast production. The money trail. There's a bigger story here about how working people get turned into content without consent. I looked at her card, Henderson Investigations, a phone number, an email address. There are some human stories that should never be converted into cheap content, I said. Agreed, she said. Which is why if you ever want to control your own narrative, call me. Until then, your identity stays protected. You have my word. She turned to leave, then paused. Mr. Riddle, she said, and this time it wasn't confirmation seeking, just acknowledgement. Whoever's behind this, they're not done. People who engineer viral campaigns like this don't stop at one hit. They'll keep pushing until something breaks. Then they'll find out I don't break easy, I said. She nodded once, got in her car, and drove away. I picked up the card she'd left, turned it over in my calloused fingers. The November evening air carried the smell of diesel from the rail yard, familiar as breathing. I'd spent 30 years being invisible by choice, moving through Union Station like a ghost who kept the floors clean and the machinery running, But now someone wanted to make very sure I knew I was being watched. As Tanya's taillights disappeared around the corner, movement caught my eye. A dark sedan parked at the dead end 50 yards down where the street terminated at the old warehouse fence. Its high beams flashed, once, twice, deliberate. Then it settled back into shadow engine, still running a patient predator, making its presence known. I stood on my porch, Tanya's card in my hand, watching that sedan watch me. Someone with serious resources knew exactly who was asking questions about Lester Riddle. They wanted me to know they were watching, but they'd miscalculated one crucial thing. I wasn't afraid of being seen anymore. I didn't sleep that night. The sedan was gone by midnight, but its message lingered like diesel exhaust. Someone with resources wanted me to know I was marked, tracked, filed away in whatever database billionaires kept on people who posed inconvenient questions. The next morning I drove to Craig's office through November rain. The pen felt heavier than it should have as I signed my name across the final incorporation document, officially bringing the Invisible Vanguard Fund into existence. There Craig said, applying his notary seal with the practiced precision of a man who'd legitimized 1,000 legal documents. As of 9:47 a.m. on November 8th, you are the anonymous benefactor behind a fully registered Colorado charitable foundation. I set down the pen, studying the bylaws we'd spent 3 days perfecting. The foundation would fund higher education scholarships, emergency relief assistance, and trade certification programs, but only for the children of night shift logistical workers across Denver. The people invisible to the morning commuters, the ones who kept the city's infrastructure running while others slept. The primary donor's identity remains locked behind the shell corporation, Craig explained, tapping the relevant section. But the legally registered agent is me. Every financial transaction will be meticulously documented and legally transparent. When they start digging, they'll find a foundation that's completely legitimate and completely untouchable. How long before Eugene Saxon's people find the Capitol Trail? I asked. Craig's expression carried the calm certainty of a chess player who'd already mapped the next 6 moves. The bait is in the water, he said. The apex predators are going to bite. When they do, we'll know exactly who's hunting you and what resources they're deploying. I thought about that dark sedan, its deliberate high-beam flash. Eugene Saxon wasn't just wealthy, he was the kind of wealthy that came with investigative teams. Forensic accountants, lawyers who specialized in finding what people tried to hide. You're using my own foundation as bait, I said. I'm using visibility as a weapon, Craig corrected. A defense hides what you're protecting. A trap lets the hunter see just enough to make them commit to the chase. He slid a folder across his desk, thick with incorporation certificates. Tax filings, the machinery of legal legitimacy. This foundation is real, Lester. It's going to do real good for real families. But it's also a flare shot into the sky, saying, here's a substantial charitable entity with anonymous funding, tied to someone in Denver's working-class infrastructure. Eugene's investigators will find it within a week, maybe less. And when they do, they'll pull every public record trace, every financial thread, try to connect it to you, Craig said. And while they're busy chasing the Foundation's paperwork, we'll be watching them, learning who they hire, what methods they use, how aggressive they're willing to get. Craig taught me years ago that the difference between a defense and a trap is visibility. A defense hides what you're protecting, but a trap lets the hunter see just enough bait to make them commit to the chase. The Invisible Vanguard Fund wasn't just charity, it was reconnaissance. The trust documents stay hidden, I confirmed. Completely separate, Craig assured me. They'll find the foundation, they won't find the trust. Not until you're ready to use it. I signed 3 more documents, each one another layer of legal protection, another breadcrumb on the trail I was laying for Eugene Saxon to follow. The following evening, I was repairing Pearl's old sewing table in my garage when my phone glowed with an unfamiliar notification. Encrypted message. Unknown number. I opened it. Mr. Riddle, this is Saskia, Nico's wife. I'm so incredibly sorry for the podcast footage. I had no idea they would butcher his backstory to create that specific angle. Please believe me. I stared at the screen for a long moment. Saskia Saxon, 31, and elegant in the designer clothes I'd seen in Nico's social media photos, had married my son believing she'd found a man of substance beneath the ambition. The encrypted text suggested a conscience her father and husband no longer possessed. My thumb hovered over the keyboard. Pearl's voice echoed in my memory, the wisdom she'd shared about measuring people by their actions during crisis, not their performance during comfort. I typed carefully. If you truly did not know, then I suggest you start watching their actions very closely. The response came within seconds. I am. That's why I'm writing. My father doesn't know I have this phone. Nico doesn't know I'm reaching out. But I can't just sit here and pretend I don't see what's happening. Another message appeared before I could respond. My father is running an asset investigation into an entity he thinks you're hiding. He has forensic accountants pulling financial registries. I don't know what he's looking for, but he's convinced it exists. The garage suddenly felt smaller. Craig's trap was working faster than we'd anticipated. I typed, "Why are you telling me this?" The pause before her response lasted almost a minute. "Because you raised Nico. You worked night shifts so he could go to college. You never asked for recognition or repayment, and now your own son is letting my father weaponize your dignity for corporate branding. That's not the man I thought I married, and it's definitely not the father-in-law who deserves what's happening to him." Saskia was caught in the space between blood and marriage, watching her biological father orchestrate the systematic destruction of her father-in-law, while her husband played the willing instrument, and she was the only one with enough conscience left to send a warning into the dark. "How much does your father know?" I asked. "He knows the viral video created public sympathy for working-class narratives. He knows there's an anonymous foundation that just incorporated in Denver, serving night shift families. He's convinced you're the connection. His team is pulling incorporation records, cross-referencing your name with every legal filing in the state." I looked at the sewing table Pearl had used to make curtains, alter my work uniforms, hem Nico's school clothes when money was tight. She'd understood that the most dangerous enemies weren't the ones who hated you. They were the ones who saw you as an obstacle to something they wanted more. "Thank you for the warning," I typed. "I don't know what they're going to find," Saskia wrote. "But whatever you're protecting, protect it fast. My father doesn't stop until he wins." The phone screen glowed with her final message, the words carrying the weight of inherited knowledge about exactly what kind of man Eugene Saxon was. "He's convinced it exists," she'd written, "and he's hunting." Eugene Saxon was hunting with forensic accountants, legal teams, the kind of resources that could find anything given enough time. But time was the one resource I was about to take away from him. Saskia's warning left me with a simple calculation. Eugene Saxon was hunting, and I had exactly 18 days to turn his hunt into a trap. Craig Morgan's corkboard dominated his office wall the next morning, a massive chronological timeline with one date circled in heavy black marker, November 28th, 2023. "This is everything," Craig said, tapping the date hard enough to make the corkboard rattle. "At midnight on the 28th, the trust undergoes its mandatory 5-year restructuring evaluation. Every beneficiary gets measured against the honor and integrity parameters your wife built into the original documents." I studied the timeline. Craig had plotted every significant date since the viral video. November 2nd, the podcast aired. November 6th, email, metadata, discovery. November 8th, foundation incorporation. November 9th, Saskia's warning. And then November 28th, circled like a target. Pearl designed this mechanism, I said, remembering the late nights at this very desk when she'd insisted on building what she called accountability architecture into the trust structure. "She did," Craig confirmed. "And she made you the sole active trustee specifically, so you'd have executive authority to submit the verified beneficiary qualification list. If Nico is formally logged under the willful lineage disparagement penalty clause, he faces an automatic 12-month evaluation freeze. 0 distributions, 0 access, 0 appeal window, until he proves restoration of family honor through measurable action." I walked to the corkboard, traced the timeline with my finger. 18 days. The same amount of time it had taken me to teach Nico to ride a bike when he was 6. Patient repetition, letting him fall, helping him up, never doing the work for him. "This isn't about punishment," I said. "No," Craig agreed. Pearl built a conditional redemption pathway. The trust doesn't destroy him. It forces him to choose between his Silicon Valley image and his actual family legacy. 12 months to demonstrate through documented action that he values the Riddle name enough to reclaim it both legally and publicly. The irony wasn't lost on me. My son had changed his surname to escape what he saw as working-class baggage, and in doing so he'd voluntarily walked away from the one thing that could have secured his future beyond any Series B funding round or investor confidence metric. What exactly happens on November 28th? I asked. Craig pulled a thick binder from his shelf, opened it to a tabbed section marked Restructuring Protocol. At 11:59 p.m., the Trust's current beneficiary designations expire. At 12:01 a.m. on the 29th, new designations take effect based on the trustees' submitted qualification list. You have executive authority to determine who passes the honor evaluation and who doesn't. The legal mechanism is automatic. Once you submit that list, it's binding for the next 5-year cycle. Does my son understand what he threw away when he changed his surname for a PR consultant's advice? Not just the fortune Pearl and I had protected, but the chance to be the steward of a promise his grandmother made to every invisible worker who keeps this city running after midnight. If I logged Nico under willful disparagement, I said he's frozen for a year. Correct. No access to trust capital, no distributions, no emergency withdrawals. But here's the crucial part. Pearl didn't make it permanent. She built in restoration criteria. If Nico can demonstrate genuine commitment to family values, public acknowledgement of his heritage, and active support for working-class communities, the freeze can be lifted at the next evaluation cycle. She gave him a way back, I said quietly. She gave him a test. Craig corrected. 1 year to prove whether he values his actual identity more than his manufactured one. The office phone rang. Craig glanced at the caller ID, his expression shifting from explanation mode to alert. "It's the probate court clerk," he said, picking up. "Craig Morgan." I watched his face as he listened. The color drained from his cheeks like water from a broken pipe. "When was it filed?" Craig asked, his voice tight. "This morning, and the hearing date is—" He grabbed a pen, scribbled on his notepad. "November 20th. 8 days from now." He hung up slowly, his hand still gripping the receiver. "What happened?" I asked, though the weight in the room had already told me the answer. Eugene Saxon's legal team filed an emergency petition with Denver County Probate Court. Craig said each word precise and controlled. They're demanding a court-ordered conservatorship and forensic cognitive evaluation. Their argument is that viral media stress has rendered you cognitively unfit to manage multi-million-dollar assets. The air in the office felt suddenly thin. "They're trying to strip my trustee authority," I said. "Before November 28th. Craig confirmed. "If they succeed, Eugene gets appointed as conservator. He takes control of the trust, submits his own beneficiary qualification list, and Nico stays fully qualified regardless of the disparagement clause. Your son gets the fortune, Eugene gets the influence, and you get declared mentally incompetent in public court records." I thought about that dark sedan, its deliberate signal, about Saskia's warning that her father was hunting, about the email metadata proving Eugene had orchestrated the viral humiliation in the first place. The war was beginning the battle lines drawn in probate court filings and trust restructuring clauses, and my son didn't even know he was standing on a battlefield where his father-in-law was already firing the opening shots. "What's their evidence?" I asked. "The petition claims erratic behavior following viral media exposure. They'll argue that a 68-year-old janitor threatening to mismanage $38 million out of spite against his successful son represents clear cognitive decline and emotional instability." Craig pulled the filed petition from his fax machine, still warm from printing. The legal language was dense, clinical, designed to strip away my dignity with the same efficiency Eugene's PR firm had used to manufacture viral content. "They're using my age against me," I said, "and your occupation, and the viral stress they created deliberately." Craig's jaw tightened. "It's elegant in a sociopathic way. They manufactured the crisis, then filed legal action claiming the crisis proves you're unfit to respond to it. When's the hearing?" "November 20th, 8 days before the trust deadline." 18 days had become 8. The timeline on Craig's corkboard suddenly looked like a countdown to detonation. "Can we fight this?" I asked. Craig met my eyes with the steady gaze of a man who'd spent 3 decades preparing for exactly this kind of battle. "Can we fight it?" he said. "Lester, we're going to destroy it. But we need to move fast, and we need to be perfect. Eugene Saxon just made the mistake of bringing a legal war to the one place where your 30 years of disciplined, documented competence becomes an unbreakable defense. He handed me the petition. They filed to have you evaluated for mental incompetence. We're going to show that court exactly what competence looks like. The marble corridor of Denver County Probate Court echoed with our footsteps as Craig and I walked toward the clerk's window, where Eugene Saxon's legal attack waited in a manila folder. The encrypted message had arrived at midnight. Petition filed. 6 hours later, I stood in a courthouse that smelled of floor polish and old paper, while Craig presented identification to retrieve the documents that would try to strip me of my civil rights. The clerk slid the folder across polished granite. Craig opened it, and I watched his jaw tighten as he scanned the first page. Conservatorship petition, he said quietly. Emergency hearing scheduled for November 20th. They're moving fast. I kept my hands steady as he began reading aloud, his voice clinical but his eyes sharp with controlled anger. Respondent demonstrates erratic decision-making patterns, consistent with age-related cognitive decline, exacerbated by recent viral media stress. His threats to restructure a $38 million trust out of personal vendetta against his son constitute clear evidence of emotional instability and fiduciary incompetence. Craig looked up. Signed by Veronica Whitfield, lead counsel. Veronica Whitfield. I'd heard the name before, a 52-year-old attorney who'd built her career representing corporate interests against individuals who dared question power structures. Eugene had hired the best predator his money could buy. They're using my age and my work as weapons, I said. Craig nodded slowly, flipping through supporting affidavits. They're using the crisis they manufactured as proof you can't handle the crisis. It's circular logic designed to strip your rights before you can defend them. I read over his shoulder. The petition painted me as a confused old man, emotionally compromised by my son's viral success, threatening to destroy family wealth out of jealous spite. Every paragraph twisted truth into pathology. My 40 years of disciplined night shifts became evidence of social isolation. My financial privacy became paranoid secrecy. My measured silence after the podcast became communication dysfunction. They'd taken the weapon they'd forged viral humiliation designed to boost my son's brand and recast it as evidence that I was too fragile to be trusted with my own decisions. Forensic cognitive evaluation required before November 28th. Craig continued. They want a court-appointed psychiatrist to assess your capacity. If the examiner finds even mild impairment, they can freeze the trust pending full conservatorship proceedings. November 28th. The deadline I'd set 40 years ago was now their target. Eugene knew about the trust structure, knew about the timeline, and was trying to use the courts to seize control before I could execute the transfer. Can they win? I asked. Craig closed the folder carefully. In probate court, with the right judge and the right expert witness, they can absolutely win, especially if they frame this as protecting a vulnerable elderly man from his own declining judgment. The clerk's office telephone rang in the background. Footsteps passed behind us, other people with their own legal battles, their own family betrayals playing out in manila folders. Then we need to prove I'm not declining, I said. Craig's expression was grim. We need to prove more than that. We need to prove they orchestrated this entire situation to create the appearance of decline. We need to document the manufactured crisis, expose the circular reasoning, and demonstrate that your decisions, however unconventional, are the product of sound mind and deliberate strategy. He gathered the documents into his briefcase. I'll schedule a comprehensive neurological evaluation with an independent specialist. Dr. Ramona Sheffield. She's brilliant, unimpeachable, and she doesn't testify for whoever pays more. If she says you're cognitively sound, Whitfield's arguments crumble. We walked back through the marble corridor past courtrooms, where judges were deciding who deserved rights and who deserved protection from themselves. That evening, I was halfway through my shift at Union Station when my phone vibrated in my pocket. Nico's number glowed on the screen. I stepped into the old phone booth alcove. They'd removed the actual phones years ago, but the wooden structure remained, offering a pocket of relative quiet, away from the terminal's constant motion. Hello, son. Dad? His voice carried that particular cadence I'd learned to recognize over the years, the same measured empathy he used in investor presentations, calibrated for maximum emotional impact with minimum personal investment. I heard about the legal situation. I'm worried about you. This kind of stress at your age, with everything going viral, I think we need to talk about getting you some support. Support. The word hung in the air like smoke. Support, I repeated. That's an interesting word for what Eugene's lawyers are trying to do. A pause. Traffic noise filtered through. From his end, he was outside somewhere, probably pacing while he delivered this performance. This isn't about Eugene, Nico said, and I could hear the script in his rhythm, the coached concern. This is about making sure you're protected, that you have help managing complex decisions. Complex decisions, as if 40 years of careful stewardship of building something meaningful in silence could be reduced to confusion requiring intervention. I watched a late train pull into the station, passengers streaming toward exits, none of them seeing me. Invisible, as always. How do you measure the distance between a father and son? In my case, you measure it in the silence that stretches across a phone line when you ask a question that should have a simple answer. Answer one question honestly. I said, my voice quiet but clear. If there was no inheritance, no trust, nothing waiting for you, would you change your surname back to Riddle tomorrow? The silence that followed told me everything I needed to know. I could hear him breathing, could hear the traffic, could hear the exact moment when his rehearsed empathy script ran out, and he had to face a simple moral test without PR handlers to guide his response. 10 seconds, 20, 30. When his voice returned, the warmth had evaporated, completely replaced by something cold and corporate. I'm flying back to Denver next week, Nico said. We need to settle this properly. Legally. Legally, not as father and son, not as family. As legal adversaries in a probate court proceeding designed to determine whether I was competent enough to deserve my own civil rights. I ended the call without another word. My son was coming home not to defend me, but to help Eugene take everything. The conservatorship petition wasn't just Eugene's strategy. It was a family collaboration, father-in-law and son-in-law, working together to institutionalize the inconvenient old man who stood between them and $38 million. But they had no idea what they were walking into. I picked up my cleaning supplies and returned to work, hand-steady mind calculating every move in the chess game that was accelerating toward November 28th. They thought they were hunting a confused old janitor. They had no idea they were walking into a trap 40 years in the making. Nico's declaration that he was flying back to settle this legally confirmed what I'd known. My son had chosen his side. The next night, I learned exactly how coordinated their assault had become. The harsh neon lights of Union Station's desolate concourse illuminated Maverick Maxwell's camera crew before I heard his voice. Predators always hunt where they know their prey works alone. It was 1:30 a.m. The last passengers had cleared the terminal 20 minutes earlier, leaving only the hum of my industrial floor buffer and the echo of my footsteps. Then the lights hit me. Professional LED panels, turning night into surgical brightness. Mr. Riddle. Maverick Maxwell's voice carried that podcast host's Polish performative sincerity, wrapped around commercial intent. He strode toward me, flanked by 2 camera operators, microphone extended like a weapon. You've become the center of a viral conversation about family betrayal. Are you the bitter janitor trying to ruin your self-made son's career out of jealousy? I stopped the floor buffer. The machine's groan faded to silence. 3 cameras all recording. This wasn't journalism, it was theater. I looked directly into the center lens. I am simply cleaning floors, I said, voice calm and measured. You are manufacturing profit out of a family's private pain. Maverick's expression shifted. He'd expected defensive stammering, not direct confrontation. He pivoted to his prepared follow-up. So you deny trying to sabotage your son's success, because you're ashamed he outgrew you. The question was designed to provoke, to create sound bites regardless of how I answered. Either way, they got their content. I deny nothing because I owe you nothing, I said. This ambush doesn't change what needs to be done. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have work to finish. I restarted the machine and returned to my routine, the buffer's hum drowning out whatever additional provocations Maverick shouted at my back. They filmed for another 3 minutes before security escorted them out. By 3 a.m., the damage was uploaded and going viral. Tanya's text glowed on my phone. The edited version makes you look unstable. This wasn't journalism, it was evidence manufacturing. I watched the video on my laptop, still in my work uniform. 90 seconds of carefully selected cuts. My statement about manufacturing profit from family pain isolated, stripped of context. The visual framing made me appear confused, defensive, erratic. Comment sections flooded with armchair psychologists, diagnosing cognitive decline, emotional instability, the exact language Eugene's petition had used. They were building a case against my competence using weapons they'd forged themselves: viral stress. They manufactured media ambushes. They coordinated, all designed to prove I was too unstable to defend my own rights. Craig called at 3:15 a.m. Eugene's team will submit this video to probate court as Exhibit A for cognitive decline, he said. They orchestrated the ambush. Then we document the full unedited footage and prove their manipulation, I replied. Understand what's happening here, Lester. This is systematic, coordinated, professional. They're manufacturing an evidentiary record designed to strip your civil rights before you can defend them. I understood perfectly. The question was how to counter an attack this comprehensive. The answer arrived the next afternoon at Rail Yard Diner, a truck stop restaurant that smelled of burnt coffee and grease. Craig and I sat in a back booth while rain hammered the windows. Kai Lindsay slid into the seat across from us looking like a man who hadn't slept well in years. 36 years old, exhausted from fighting a rewritten history nobody believed. He'd co-founded the startup with Nico back when they were both scrambling for angel investment, back when bootstrapped struggle was their shared identity. Then he'd watched his partner erase those origins for venture capital credibility, transforming authentic poverty into disposable marketing copy. These pitch decks from 2018 show Nico selling the bootstrapped son of a janitor story to angel investors. Kai said, hands trembling as he slid an encrypted flash drive across the stained table. He built our entire Series A narrative around coming from nothing, around understanding working class struggle. Then he married into Saxon money and erased you completely. Changed his surname, rewrote the company. Origin's story started claiming prep school pedigree he never had. Craig scanned through files on his laptop. This is documentary proof of deliberate fraud, Craig said. Investors were sold a narrative your son knew was about to become a lie. Kai's fear was palpable. I signed an NDA, he said. If I testify publicly, Eugene will destroy me with legal fees I can't afford. He's already threatened it twice, once when I questioned the rebrand, once when I asked about equity dilution that coincidentally happened right after Nico became Saxon. I studied the exhausted man across from me, recognizing the particular fatigue that comes from watching someone rewrite reality and being powerless to speak truth. Eugene crushes people in private, Kai continued. NDA violations, slap lawsuits, legal fees that bankrupt you before you ever see a courtroom. He operates in shadows where retaliation is cheap and truth is expensive. So we bring you into the light, I said, somewhere public enough that retaliation becomes impossible. Kai met my eyes, weighing fear against exhaustion, silence against vindication. Kai understood what I was learning, and real-time predators, like Eugene Saxon, don't fear the truth. They fear the spotlight that makes truth impossible to ignore. Build a stage large enough where the entire industry is watching, Kai said slowly, and I'll stand on it. But it has to be big enough they can't make me disappear. The encrypted drive held everything: pitch decks, selling poverty, as authenticity emails discussing the strategic pivot to old money branding, the deliberate erasure of his father from the company origin story. Documentary proof that Nico's carefully constructed mythology was calculated, commercially motivated fiction. But Kai's fear was justified. Eugene had built an empire on crushing dissent before it reached daylight, on bearing truth under legal costs that turned justice into a luxury only the wealthy could afford. The condition was clear: build a stage large enough, public enough, documented enough that retaliation becomes too visible, too costly, impossible to execute in shadows. I knew exactly what kind of stage would force everyone into the light. The stage I had in mind was the Foundation's annual Gala, a charity event already scheduled for November 27th, one day before the trust deadline. But first I needed to understand exactly what Eugene was planning. The video feed flickered to life on November 14th, connecting my small Denver home to Saskia's San Francisco mansion, a digital bridge I immediately sensed would collapse under the weight of what was about to happen. Saskia's face filled the screen, and I barely recognized my daughter-in-law. The polished confidence I'd seen in wedding photos had been replaced by exhaustion guilt, something close to desperation. She sat in what appeared to be a home office, expensive furniture framing her like a portrait of wealth that brought no peace. Please, she began, voice tight with controlled emotion. We need to find a resolution before this destroys everyone. Nico doesn't understand the full picture, and my father, movement behind her, a figure stepping into frame with the casual authority of someone who owned not just the room, but everyone in it. Eugene Saxon, 72 years old, silver hair, perfectly styled, wearing a cardigan that probably cost more than my monthly salary. He placed a hand on Saskia's shoulder, a gesture that looked paternal, but functioned as a leash. Doesn't understand. Eugene's voice carried the particular disdain of old money addressing someone it considered temporary. What your son-in-law doesn't understand, Saskia, is that this conversation is unnecessary. He leaned forward, filling more of the frame, making sure I saw him clearly. Old man, you don't comprehend how modern capital operates. Sign the management transfer. This amateur resistance ends badly for you. There it was, the voice behind every move, the architect finally stepping out of shadows. Eugene Saxon wasn't just my son's father-in-law. He was the puppet master who'd been pulling strings since the moment Nico changed his surname. And I understand perfectly how capital operates, I replied, keeping my voice level. What you don't understand is that some things can't be purchased. Eugene's smile was cold practiced. Everything can be purchased, Mr. Riddle. You just haven't seen the invoice yet. Saskia's hand moved suddenly, and the video feed cut to black. 5 seconds later, my phone vibrated with an encrypted message. Saskia, I'm sorry I tried. He controls everything now. Then another message arriving so quickly she must have been typing while Eugene was still in the room. They have pre-written public confession for Nico to read at Charity Gala, November 27th. Script frames you as fully senile, compassionate son relieving beloved father of fiduciary burden. A third message followed. The gala is their kill shot. National media will be there. Its coordinated character assassination designed to justify the conservatorship petition. I stared at the screen, watching the messages arrive like pieces of a puzzle finally clicking into place. Eugene Saxon wasn't just my son's father-in-law. He was the architect of a machine designed to convert family bonds into capital assets, and my son had become his most willing instrument. The November 27th Gala. The same event I'd been planning to use as Kai's public stage was already Eugene's chosen battlefield. He'd scheduled his scripted performance for the day before the trust deadline, timing it perfectly to create maximum legal and public pressure. But Eugene had made one critical error. He'd told me his plan. The next morning I sat across from Craig in his law office while he read an email that had been forwarded from a source inside Nico's company. Someone with a conscience, apparently. Someone who'd seen enough. From Nico Saxon, Craig read aloud, his voice tight with controlled anger. To Apex Brand Solutions. Subject podcast final cut approval. Message leave the janitor line in. It creates perfect friction narrative. It's exactly the personal brand evolution that scales. The timestamp showed November 6th, 2024, 3 days before the podcast aired. Craig looked up from his laptop screen, and I saw something in his expression I rarely witnessed from him. Genuine shock at human cruelty. He approved it, I said quietly, in writing, with his corporate signature. This isn't careless negligence or PR team overreach, Craig said. This is your son explicitly authorizing his own father's public humiliation for brand metrics. The email sat there on the screen corporate header, gleaming with digital authenticity. Every metadata tag confirmed its sender, verification timestamp, corporate domain authentication. Nico had received the pre-release podcast cut, reviewed the segment where Maverick mocked his father's occupation, and made a calculated business decision, leave it in because it created perfect friction narrative. My humiliation had been approved in a corporate email chain like any other brand asset. Craig printed the email, added it to the growing evidence folder that now contained Kai's pitch decks, Saskia's encrypted warnings, Maverick's deceptive editing, and Eugene's conservatorship petition. Eugene's PR firm orchestrated it, Craig said, laying out the documents in chronological order. Nico approved it in writing. Maverick manufactured the ambush footage. The gala script is already written. This is systematic, coordinated family destruction for profit. I studied the timeline Craig had constructed. Every piece connected. Eugene had hired the PR firm. The firm had pitched the podcast strategy. Nico had approved the humiliation. Maverick had ambushed me for additional footage. Eugene had filed the incapacity petition. And now they'd scripted Nico's compassionate public confession for the gala. And the November 27th gala is where they plan to execute the final blow, I said. Craig was right. We weren't building a legal defense anymore. We were constructing a mirror so precise, so unavoidable, that my son would have no choice but to see exactly what he'd traded his name for. We are forcing him to look into a mirror he cannot escape, Craig said, closing the evidence folder with the finality of a judge's gavel. Every piece of evidence shows him exactly what he became when he traded his father for investor confidence. The gala would still happen on November 27th, exactly as Eugene planned. National media would attend exactly as he'd arranged. Nico would take the stage with his prepared script exactly as they'd rehearsed. But between now and then, Craig and I would transform that stage into something Eugene Saxon hadn't anticipated, a public revelation of every email, every corporate signature, every documented step of their systematic betrayal. They'd made one critical miscalculation. They'd documented everything. Every orchestrated humiliation, every approved insult, every coordinated attack, all preserved in corporate communications that would now become exhibits in a very different kind of public performance. The November 27th gala would still be their chosen battlefield, but I would control the stage. Controlling the stage meant eliminating every weapon Eugene could use against me. The first weapon to neutralize was the one he'd built his entire legal strategy around my supposed cognitive decline. The sterile clinic smelled of antiseptic and possibility as Dr. Ramona Sheffield's methodical pen scratched across evaluation forms, documenting every cognitive test I'd just passed with surgical precision. Dr. Sheffield was a court-appointed independent neurologist with 28 years evaluating cognitive capacity. She'd seen countless attempts to manufacture incompetence claims and could spot genuine decline from performative legal strategy with clinical precision. That's exactly why Craig had requested her specifically. It was November 16th, and I'd been sitting in this clinic since 9 that morning. 5 hours of exhaustive neurological evaluation, memory tests, psychiatric assessments, executive function challenges, spatial reasoning puzzles. Every metric designed to detect the cognitive decline that Eugene's petition claimed was rendering me unfit to manage my own affairs. Mr. Riddle, Dr. Sheffield said, not looking up from her notes, I need you to recall the 3 objects I mentioned 15 minutes ago during the spatial reasoning test. I watched her pen hover over the form, ready to record my response. Pen calendar buffalo, I said. You placed them in that order to test if I'd confused sequential presentation with categorical grouping. Her pen stopped moving. She looked up, dark eyes sharp with professional interest. Exceptional, she said, making careful notes. Your pattern recognition and metacognitive awareness are well above age norm benchmarks. Craig sat in the corner of the examination room, observing but not interfering. He'd explained that morning that my proactive approach, submitting to comprehensive evaluation before the November 20th. Hearing rather than waiting to defend against Eugene's attacks would create an ironclad medical shield. At 2:30 p.m., Dr. Sheffield reviewed her final evaluation summary, with both of us present. Mr. Riddle demonstrates cognitive function consistent with individuals 30 years his junior, she said, signing the official document with practiced authority. No evidence whatsoever of impairment decline or instability. She slid the certified evaluation across her desk toward Craig. This medical shield is ironclad, Craig said, carefully placing the document in his briefcase. Eugene claimed viral stress rendered you unfit. This evaluation proves the opposite. Eugene had weaponized my age, my occupation, the viral stress his own PR firm manufactured, but every weapon he'd forged was about to shatter against medical documentation proving I'd handled his coordinated assault with perfect cognitive clarity. They manufactured the crisis to justify the petition, I said. We just documented that I handled their manufactured crisis with perfect competence. Craig filed the certified evaluation with probate court that afternoon as preemptive counter-evidence. Eugene's entire incapacity argument rested on portraying me as an elderly man, broken by stress and age. Dr. Sheffield's evaluation demolished that narrative with clinical data, no amount of legal maneuvering could challenge. The next morning, November 17th, Craig and I sat in his law office finalizing the Foundation Gala strategy. November 27th, Gala. November 28th, trust restructuring deadline. Craig said, reviewing the timeline we'd constructed. This gives you exactly 24 hours between public revelation and legal execution. The timing was deliberate precise. The gala would force everything into daylight. Kai's evidence, Nico's email approval, Eugene's orchestration, all of it presented to witnesses who couldn't be silenced or intimidated. Then 24 hours later, the trust restructuring would activate, permanently securing the capital for the foundation before Eugene could mount any legal counteroffensive. Eugene wanted the gala as his kill shot, I said. We're turning it into the stage. Kai Lindsay needs public enough that retaliation becomes impossible. Tanya had joined us, helping coordinate media outreach for the event. She looked up from her laptop, expression thoughtful. You're inviting Nico and Eugene to their own public exposure. Not just inviting, Craig said. We're guaranteeing they'll be in the room when it happens. He handed me 2 custom-printed invitations on heavy cardstock, the kind reserved for VIP donors at charity events. I read the text we'd carefully crafted together. In recognition of your commitment to family values and community advancement, we invite you to join us at the head table for the Invisible Vanguard Fund inaugural gala. The invitations were addressed to Nico Saxon and Eugene Saxon, respectively, offering front row VIP placement at the main gala table. You're guaranteeing they'll be in the room when you expose everything? Tanya asked. I set the invitations down carefully, feeling the weight of what they represented. They can attend and face the truth in front of witnesses, I said, or decline and admit they knew what was coming. Either way, they lose. The trap was elegant in its simplicity. Eugene had scripted Nico's compassionate confession for the gala, planning to use that public stage to justify the conservatorship petition. He'd invited national media, regional, business leaders, all the witnesses he wanted for his performance. By sending these VIP invitations, I was confirming that same audience would be present, but for a very different kind of revelation. If Nico and Eugene declined, they'd signal awareness that something had changed, that their planned performance had been compromised. If they attended, they'd be sitting at the head table when Kai Lindsay took the microphone, when the email metadata appeared on screens, when their documented conspiracy was laid bare for every witness to see. Pearl used to say that patience wasn't passive, it was the art of letting your enemies commit so completely to their attack that retreat becomes impossible. And I'd just sent Nico and Eugene engraved invitations to a trap they couldn't escape without admitting they knew it existed. Tanya watched me seal the invitations in their certified priority mail envelopes. Lester, you've spent 3 decades being invisible by choice, she said quietly. Are you ready to step out of the shadows? I thought about 40 years of night shifts, 40 years of watching commuters pass without seeing me, 40 years of building something in silence while my son traded authenticity for brand metrics and old money credibility. It's time, I said. Craig nodded, making final notes in the case file. November 27th, he said. 10 days from now, everything converges. The certified invitations went out that afternoon. 10 days until every piece of evidence, Kai's pitch decks, the email metadata, Nico's explicit approval, Eugene's orchestration would be presented in front of regional business leaders, labor unions, and national media. 10 days until the Foundation Gala Eugene had planned, as his kill shot, became the public stage where I would force my son to look into a mirror he couldn't escape. But first, the November 20th incapacity hearing would test whether Eugene could strip my authority before the trap could spring. The November 20th hearing was 2 days away, but before Eugene's legal team could argue my incompetence in court, I needed to give them something more compelling to focus on bait, so attractive they couldn't resist taking it. The security monitors tracked every movement across the banking lobby floor as I walked toward the private trust services window on November 18th, carrying documents that would function as breadcrumbs for a very specific kind of predator. Douglas Hewitt, senior trust officer with 23 years managing high net worth accounts, met me in the private consultation room. He processed sensitive financial transactions with the discretion of someone who understood that privacy and transparency served different strategic purposes. Mr. Riddle, he said, reviewing the foundation registration paperwork I'd brought. The foundation registration requires a seed transfer from the primary trust account. How much would you like to allocate it? I'd calculated the exact amount with Craig the night before. Enough to be visible in financial disclosure registries, not enough to actually matter. 250,000, I said. Enough to be visible, not enough to be vulnerable. Douglas made careful notes, his expression professionally neutral. This will appear in standard financial disclosure registries within 48 hours, he said. Anyone monitoring foundation formations will see the capital source. Exactly what I was counting on. When the transaction authorization forms came, I signed them with deliberate care, making sure Douglas understood my specific requirements. The transfer should be processed through standard public channels, I said. No privacy shields, no delayed reporting. Douglas paused, pen hovering over the processing options form. This will be completely transparent, he confirmed. Anyone searching Foundation seed capital in Denver will trace it directly back to your trust account. That's the intention, I replied. Craig called my cell phone as Douglas was processing the final paperwork. You're making yourself look vulnerable on purpose, Craig said when I explained what I was doing. This is fishing with yourself as bait. Fishing with bait is predictable, I said, watching Douglas type transaction codes into his terminal. Fishing with yourself requires understanding exactly which predators can't resist an apparently wounded target. The transfer executed at 10:43 a.m. $250,000 moving from the trust account to the Foundation Registration Fund, processed through every standard transparency channel the banking system offered. The digital trail was clear, obvious exactly what Eugene's forensic accountants would be monitoring for. I returned to Craig's office to wait. At 3 p.m., Craig's secure monitoring systems designed to track who was searching for what in public financial registries started flashing alerts. 3 separate forensic accounting firms just queried Denver Foundation registrations. Craig said, watching the digital traces appear on his screen. All within the past hour. I moved to stand behind his chair, watching the search patterns emerge. Eugene's team, I said. They found your transfer, Craig confirmed. They're tracing the capital source right now. The bait worked faster than expected. The monitoring software tracked each query. Sophisticated searches designed to identify new foundation formations, trace seed capital sources, map financial relationships. Eugene had hired expensive professionals who knew exactly how to find what they were looking for, and I'd made sure they found it. We watched the digital footprints for another hour, confirming the pattern. Eugene's forensic accountants had discovered the foundation transfer, traced it back to the trust account, and were now documenting what they believed was my critical mistake. At 6:47 p.m., an anonymous text message arrived on Craig's secure server. The number was a burner phone, untraceable, but the message's content told us everything we needed to know. Craig read it aloud, his voice carrying a mix of satisfaction and controlled anticipation. We see the money trail. Transparent foundation registration from trust account balance 38 million. Amateur mistake. A second text arrived 15 seconds later. We will be at the gala. We are taking what belongs to us. I sat down across from Craig's desk, feeling the pieces lock into place with the precision of a bank vault mechanism engaging. They think the trust capital will be accessible at the event, I said. They're planning a public legal ambush. Eugene's team thought they'd discovered my fatal mistake. The amateur error that would let them seize everything at the gala, but what they'd actually found was the exact commitment that would ensure they couldn't escape when the real trap closed. Craig pulled up his case timeline, adding the threatening text to the evidence folder that now contained Dr. Sheffield's evaluation, Kai's pitch decks, Nico's email approval, Saskia's warnings, and every other piece of documented proof. They think you made a critical mistake, Craig said, that the foundation transfer exposed the trust to legal action during the gala. I thought about the actual structure we'd built, the layers of protection Craig had designed, the trust mechanisms that had been activated weeks ago, the capital that was already secured beyond Eugene's reach, regardless of what happened at the gala. What they don't understand is that the money already moved, I said. The trust is already protected. They're preparing to attack something that won't be there. Craig leaned back in his chair, studying the threatening text on his screen. November 27th, he said. They'll show up expecting to seize vulnerable assets and find themselves facing documented evidence of everything they've done. He read the threatening text one more time, his voice carrying an edge I rarely heard from him. "We see the trail. We are taking what belongs to us." The words hung in the air between us. Eugene's arrogant certainty, his absolute confidence that he'd outmaneuvered an elderly janitor, his commitment to a public confrontation he believed he'd already won. "They're coming to the gala," I said. Not just Nico with his scripted confession. Eugene's entire legal team, forensic accountants, probably corporate counsel ready to execute emergency asset freezes. They think they're walking into a killshot opportunity. Craig closed his laptop with careful precision. "Perfect," he said. "The more resources they commit, the more witnesses there will be when we expose everything they've done. They're not just taking the bait, they're bringing reinforcements." The anonymous text glowed in my memory. "We see the money trail. We will be at the gala. We are taking what belongs to us." Eugene's forensic accountants had traced the foundation transfer, believed they'd discovered my vulnerability, and committed to a public ambush at the November 27th event. What they didn't know, what they couldn't know, was that the trust capital had already been moved, protected, restructured beyond their reach. They were preparing to seize assets that would no longer exist. And while they focused on that phantom opportunity, Craig and I would present every email, every documented betrayal, every piece of evidence to an audience of national media, business leaders, and labor representatives who would witness exactly what Nico and Eugene had become. Eugene's team believed they were preparing to seize vulnerable assets at the gala. What they didn't realize was that by then, those assets would have been restructured and placed permanently beyond their reach. But first, my son needed to arrive for his performance. Nico's arm landed across my shoulders with practiced affection while a camera clicked somewhere behind the luggage carousel at Denver International Airport. "Dad, it's been too long," Nico said, voice carrying that warmth he reserved for audiences. "We're here to take care of you now." Gray November skies hung over the arrivals terminal as Saskia stood beside him, expression caught between guilt and exhaustion. Behind them, a man in his early 30s held a professional camera. "Trevor, get a few more shots," Nico said. "I want to remember this moment." Trevor Ashford, the freelance photographer Nico had hired to document his fabricated narrative of filial devotion. Not a spontaneous reunion, a staged production complete with hired documentation. I let Nico's arm rest across my shoulders, playing my role in his theater. The camera clicked 3 more times. Evidence being manufactured, dutiful son, returning to care for declining father, protecting himself against future accusations of abandonment. Every gesture was calculated, every word spoken loud enough for nearby travelers to overhear, every photograph angled to convey concern, compassion, family bonds that had never existed. "Your home is exactly as I remember it," Nico said an hour later, standing in my small living room. He'd never lived here. This house was purchased after he'd left for college after Pearl had passed. But the statement sounded good, created the impression of continuity. I made coffee while Trevor positioned himself in the hallway, capturing candid moments that were anything but. Saskia barely spoke, sitting on the edge of the couch like someone attending a funeral she hadn't wanted to witness. "How long does it take to dismantle a father's dignity? 24 hours, 48. The answer was exactly as long as it takes to manufacture enough evidence to justify your predetermined conclusion. The next day, November 20th, Nico drove me to an elite dining club in downtown Denver, the kind of establishment where membership required net worth verification, the kind of place where Eugene Saxon felt comfortable conducting business. Eugene waited at a corner table leather portfolio, already open legal documents arranged like weapons on white linen. "Lester," he said without standing. My first name delivered like a dismissal. I sat across from him while Nico positioned himself at the table's head. Not beside me, not beside Eugene, but in the patriarch's seat. Symbolic geography revealing their internalized power structure. Eugene slid a bound document across the table. The pages were thick, expensive. "Your original family name is a net negative liability to our public market valuation," Eugene said, voice carrying the coldness of someone delivering a self-evident verdict. "This settlement provides for your transition into luxury-assisted living care, while transferring executive management of trust assets to professional administrators who understand modern capital markets." I turned pages, slowly reading sections Craig and I had already reviewed in the copy Saskia had forwarded: voluntary medical residency, cognitive assessment protocols, transfer of fiduciary authority. Everything designed to strip my legal rights, while framing it as compassionate intervention. We will ensure you are protected from yourself, Eugene continued. The stress of managing complex financial instruments at your age with your occupation's limited exposure to sophisticated capital structures creates unacceptable risk. My occupation. 40 years of disciplined night shifts reduced to evidence of incompetence. Nico leaned forward, adding his rehearsed contribution. Dad, this is about making sure you're taken care of, he said. The assisted living facility is exceptional private suite, full medical staff activities, designed for your demographic. Your demographic. Age is disqualification, class is incompetence. I set the document down carefully, feeling the Foundation Gala invitation folded in my jacket's inner pocket. November the 27th, 7 days from now. The stage was set, the audience confirmed the evidence compiled. But Eugene and Nico needed to believe they'd won today. I understand, I said quietly, the words tasting like cold steel wrapped in velvet courtesy. Eugene's expression shifted satisfaction, replacing calculation. The signing ceremony is scheduled for tomorrow morning, 9 a.m., at our corporate counsel's office, he said. Bring your attorney. We'll execute the transfer documents and establish the new management structure. Tomorrow morning, November 21st, 6 days before the gala. I nodded slowly, playing the exhausted old man, finally accepting his obsolescence. I will meet your legal counsel tomorrow to execute signatures, I said. Nico and Eugene exchanged glances, the look that passes between people who believe they've successfully concluded a difficult negotiation. The old man had capitulated. The resistance was over. What they didn't see was the Foundation Gala invitation in my jacket pocket, dated for November 27th, 1 day after their signing ceremony, 1 day before the trust deadline would activate Craig's structured protections. What they didn't know was that the signing ceremony Eugene had scheduled would become the trap Craig had designed, an affidavit of corporate interrogation and acknowledgement, documenting every threat, every demand, every explicit statement of their intent to seize assets through fraudulent incapacity claims. They thought they were consolidating victory. They were providing sworn testimony to their own conspiracy. I stood from the table, accepting the settlement documents Eugene handed me like a defeated general, accepting surrender terms. Thank you for your patience. I said the words carrying none of the meaning they assumed. Eugene nodded with the satisfaction of someone who just acquired a valuable asset at discount price. Nico walked me to his rental car arm once again across my shoulders for anyone watching. You're making the right decision, Dad, he said. The Foundation Gala invitation pressed against my chest, reminder of what was coming. 7 days until everything they thought they'd buried would surface in front of national media, business leaders, and labor representatives who would witness exactly what my son had traded his name for. 7 days until the gala would reveal everything they thought they'd successfully hidden. Those 6 days would reveal everything, but the countdown accelerated faster than even I'd anticipated. The witnesses Eugene thought couldn't be silenced were already beginning to speak. Saskia's breath turned to white vapor in the sub-zero parking structure, her hands trembling around the encrypted USB drive she'd spent 3 days copying without Eugene's knowledge. It was 11:47 p.m. on November 22nd. Craig and I stood in the frozen concrete structure 3 levels below, street level, our own breath visible in the November cold. Saskia had chosen this location for the same reason people always choose parking structures for clandestine meetings. No cameras, no witnesses, just the echo of our voices against concrete walls. I'm sorry it took so long, Saskia said, her voice shaking from cold or fear or both. Eugene keeps everything encrypted. I had to copy the files when he was asleep. She handed the drive to Craig, who plugged it into his laptop immediately. The screen illuminated our faces with blue light. As file directories appeared thousands of messages organized by date and participant. Eugene told Nico exactly which words would trigger maximum humiliation while protecting them legally. Saskia said, pointing to a chat thread dated November 4th, 2024. Look at this exchange. Craig opened the file. I read over his shoulder, watching my son's name appear in conversation with his father-in-law, discussing how to weaponize my occupation for commercial gain. Eugene's message was clinical in its cruelty. The night janitor referenced tests extremely well with target demographic. Triggers sympathy for bootstrapped founder narrative, while establishing clear class separation. Legal reviewed no actionable defamation if stated as biographical fact. Maximize the contrast. Nico's response came 6 minutes later. What about blowback from actual family? Eugene's reply, managed through incapacity petition, if necessary. We're establishing framework now. Every public statement he makes in response becomes evidence of emotional instability triggered by viral stress. The crisis manufactures its own legal justification. They planned every insult, every degrading reference. Saskia continued, her words coming faster. Now, urgency overriding fear. It was investor theater. Eugene showed Nico how to weaponize your poverty for funding rounds, then how to weaponize the public humiliation for incapacity claims. Craig scrolled through more messages, his expression darkening with each screen. This is premeditated conspiracy, he said quietly. Every element documented in their own communications. Saskia wrapped her arms around herself against the cold. I won't be complicit in stripping you of your civil rights, she said, looking at me directly for the first time. Eugene thinks I don't understand legal strategy, but I grew up watching him destroy people through the courts. This is what he does. He manufactures crises, then offers to solve them for a price. Betrayal from family cuts deepest, but defection from within their ranks cuts through steel. I accepted the USB drive from Craig, feeling its weight in my palm, a few ounces of plastic and silicon, containing comprehensive evidence of exactly how my son had been transformed into Eugene's instrument. Thank you, I said simply. Saskia nodded, already moving toward her car. She'd done what conscience demanded, but she was still terrified of what Eugene would do when he discovered her betrayal. She drove away quickly, taillights disappearing into the November night. Craig and I sat in his car reviewing the files for another hour, cataloging the evidence that would become exhibits at the gala. Every chat log, every strategic directive, every calculated decision to convert family bonds into capital assets. The next morning, November the 23rd, Tanya's article hit the front page of Denver's major newspaper, with a headline designed to ignite exactly the conversation we needed. The invisible vanguard, anonymous millions backing Denver's night shift labor families. She'd structured it perfectly, hiding my identity completely, while detailing the foundation's financial scope with enough specificity that anyone paying attention could trace the capital source. The article described a mysterious benefactor who'd worked Denver's night shifts for 40 years while quietly building a trust to support the families of custodial workers, transit employees, overnight security guards. No names, no direct references to Nico's podcast, just a parallel story that invited comparison. Tanya called me at noon, voice tight with controlled excitement. The article went viral in 4 hours, she said. 60,000 shares and climbing. People are connecting the podcast insults to the foundation timeline. By evening, social media had made the connections explicit. Comment threads filled with people cross-referencing Nico's mockery of his night janitor, father, with the anonymous foundation serving night shift workers. The national conversation had shifted from celebrity podcast drama to something deeper, corporate greed versus working-class dignity children who abandon their origins versus those who honor them. The foundation's existence was now public knowledge, even if my identity remained hidden. Eugene's team would have seen the article, traced the financial disclosures, confirmed that the vulnerable assets they'd planned to seize at the gala were real. Craig's secure server received Eugene's response at 8:34 p.m. The threatening email glowed on his laptop screen, message clear and absolute in its miscalculation. If you claim association with this fund at the gala, we will destroy you as a fraud who faked poverty. How do you threaten a man with exposure when his poverty was always real, only his wealth was hidden? Craig read the email twice, then forwarded it to our evidence folder with a note. Written acknowledgement that respondent controls foundation assets. Direct contradiction to incapacity claims filed November 11th. Subject line extortion threat and admission of awareness. That single email accomplished what weeks of depositions might not have achieved. Eugene's legal team had just committed to writing that they knew I controlled the foundation. The same foundation whose existence proved I possessed the cognitive capacity and strategic planning ability to build and maintain complex financial structures for 40 years. Their own threat contradicted every sworn statement in their incapacity petition. They just handed you the final piece. Craig said, closing his laptop. Documentary evidence that they know you're competent enough to control millions, sent the same week they're arguing you're too impaired to manage your own affairs. The gala was 4 days away, November 27th. The stage was set, the audience confirmed, the evidence compiled into packages that would be distributed to every media outlet, every business leader, every labor representative in attendance. Eugene thought he was issuing a threat. What he'd actually done was provide written proof that his entire legal strategy was based on fraudulent claims he knew were false. 4 days until surgical precision would be required. 4 days until everything they thought they'd successfully buried would surface in front of 300 witnesses who would carry the truth beyond any courtroom, any legal maneuver, any attempt to control the narrative through expensive lawyers and manufactured crises. The final piece of evidence sat in Craig's secure server, time-stamped and permanent. Preparation for public exposure would require surgical precision. That surgical precision began with Kai Lindsay's courage and ended with my final night shift, the bookends of 40 years condensed into 72 hours. The archive warehouse smelled of decaying paper and broken promises exactly where Kai Lindsay had chosen to detonate his non-disclosure agreement, November 24th. Craig Philip Norris and I met Kai in the same old warehouse where he and Nico had stored their first startup's paperwork before success made them forget what struggle actually meant. The space hadn't changed: concrete floors, metal shelving units holding boxes of forgotten contracts, the musty smell of documents nobody would ever read again. Kai looked different than he had at the diner. Tanya's article had galvanized something in him, transformed fear into purpose. Nico rehearsed the poverty narrative 47 times before the Series A pitch, Kai said, laying out original investor pitch decks on a dusty table. I counted. 47 practice runs where he perfected the inflection, the pause before mentioning his struggling night janitor father, the emotional catch in his voice. Philip Norris set up his notary equipment, preparing to witness what would become sworn testimony. Kai pulled out investor correspondence emails, term sheets, internal memos, detailing exactly how Nico had constructed his origin story. He told investors his father was struggling, destitute. Kai continued, his voice steady. Now all hesitation burned away by Tanya's article igniting national conversation, all while blocking him from family communications, making sure the struggling father remained conveniently distant and unable to contradict the narrative. The unredacted correspondence showed systematic fraud spanning 3 years. Nico selling himself as the bootstrapped founder who understood working-class struggle-building investor sympathy on the foundation of his father's genuine poverty, then pivoting to old-money Saxon branding the moment Saskia's family capital became available. I'm done protecting fraud for quarterly earnings, Kai said, signing the sworn affidavit with Philip's witness seal beside his signature. How many lies does it take to build a billion-dollar valuation on the back of your father's authentic suffering? 47 rehearsals, apparently. 47 calculated performances where my son transformed genuine hardship into commercial asset, then discarded the source once it served its purpose. But Eugene wasn't finished fighting. On November the 25th, his legal team made one final desperate attempt to stop what was coming. Craig and I sat in Judge Margaret Caldwell's emergency chambers, while Veronica Whitfield argued that the Foundation Gala should be legally halted. Judge Caldwell, emergency chambers, magistrate, with 15 years, adjudicating corporate disputes, listened with the patient expression of someone who'd heard every variation of legal manipulation. This event constitutes premeditated corporate defamation engineered by mentally incompetent individual. Veronica argued, her voice carrying the certainty of someone accustomed to winning through aggressive positioning. We respectfully request immediate temporary restraining order preventing the November 27th gathering. Craig stood placing 2 documents on the judge's bench with quiet precision. Dr. Sheffield's neurological assessment shows perfect cognitive function as of November 18th, he said, certified by court-appointed independent specialist. Additionally, the Foundation operates under independent corporate bylaws filed with the state 3 weeks ago. Petitioners' incapacity claims are contradicted by their own threatening communications, acknowledging respondents' control of Foundation assets. Judge Caldwell reviewed the documents, Dr. Sheffield's evaluation, the Foundation's legal structure, Eugene's threatening email that Craig had submitted as evidence of his awareness that I possessed full cognitive capacity. She looked up, expression neutral but voice final. Motion denied, Judge Caldwell said. The Foundation operates under independent bylaws. Petitioner has demonstrated no standing to interfere with a legally constituted charitable organization's public event. Furthermore, the medical evidence directly contradicts claims of incompetence. Veronica tried to object, but Judge Caldwell was already closing the file. The legal runway was clear. November 27th would proceed exactly as planned. That night, November 26th. My final shift, I returned to Denver Union Station one last time. 11:40 p.m. The terminal was quiet. Most passengers already home were settled into hotel rooms. Just the overnight workers remained the invisible souls who kept the city functioning while everyone else slept. I pushed my floor buffer across the main concourse, carefully working winter grime from tiles I'd cleaned thousands of times before. My hands knew every inch of this floor, every slight grade change, every worn patch that needed extra attention. This floor has witnessed more dignity than any boardroom ever will, I said quietly to myself, watching my reflection in the polished surface. 40 years of night shifts, 40 years of invisible labor that built something permanent, while my son built something hollow. The difference between foundation and facade. I finished the final section at 11:58 p.m., returning my equipment to storage for the last time. Gloria and Marcus were working the north wing. I'd already said my private goodbyes to them earlier in the week, explaining that tomorrow night would change everything. The mop handle felt sacred, 40 years of honest work condensed into one final stroke. I pulled out my encrypted phone and sent Tanya the message we'd agreed upon. Tomorrow night, I step onto that stage, I typed. But remember, this story must never be about me. It belongs entirely to every soul working after midnight. Her response came immediately. Understood. The evidence speaks for itself. I stood in the center of the terminal, looking out at the space I'd served for 4 decades. Thousands of commuters had passed through here, none seeing me, all depending on the work I did in darkness, so they could travel in light. The station clock tower chimed midnight. November 27th had arrived. 48 hours until the November 28th trust deadline. 48 hours until the legal mechanism Pearl and I had built would activate, securing the capital permanently for the families who needed it most. Every legal barrier Eugene had attempted to erect lay in ruins, the incapacity petition destroyed by Dr. Sheffield's evaluation, the emergency injunction denied by Judge Caldwell, his threatening email providing documentary proof he knew I possessed full cognitive capacity. My encrypted message to Tanya disappeared into the network final instructions transmitted. Tomorrow night, the Foundation Gala would transform from elegant charity event into public reckoning. 300 witnesses, business leaders, labor representatives. National media would see every piece of evidence Craig and I had compiled. Kai's affidavit, Saskia's chat logs, Nico's email approval, Eugene's notarized threats, Philip Norris's certified record of the November 21st signing ceremony. All of it documented, verified, ready for distribution. And Eugene still believed he was walking into routine corporate damage control, still thought the Foundation transfer I'd deliberately made visible was the vulnerability he could exploit. He had no idea the trap had already closed. The gala preparation would require surgical precision and absolute timing. But I'd been preparing for this moment for 40 years. 40 years of preparation condensed into the moment I walked into Bitshare Concert Hall and saw 300 faces waiting for a show they didn't yet understand. The crystal chandeliers cast calculated light across 300 faces who had no idea they were about to witness a public execution. 7 p.m. The Foundation Gala filled Bocher Concert Hall's ballroom with Denver's business elite labor union representatives and national media Craig had personally invited. I sat at the Foundation table near the front, Craig beside me with his laptop connected to the massive LED projection screen that dominated the stage. Eugene and Nico occupied the VIP table. I'd personally invited them to front row seats, to their own exposure. Saskia sat beside Nico, her expression caught between dread and resignation. She knew what was coming. They didn't. The ballroom smelled of expensive perfume and catered food, the kind of charity event where wealthy people gathered to feel good, about helping the invisible workers they'd never actually see. Except tonight, Those invisible workers would become devastatingly visible. Before the official program could begin, Eugene stood abruptly moving toward the stage with the territorial confidence of someone accustomed to controlling every room he entered. He spoke briefly to the event coordinator, gesturing toward Nico with practiced authority. High-tier donor privilege purchased specifically for this moment. Eugene had maneuvered his son to the microphone before I could speak exactly as Craig and I had anticipated. Nico stepped onto the stage at 7:05 p.m., positioning himself at the podium with the same polished presence he used for investor presentations. The ballroom quieted 300 faces turning toward my son as he prepared to deliver the performance Eugene had scripted. "We celebrate charity tonight," Nico began, his voice carrying that particular warmth that came from professional media training. "But we must also address my father's declining mental health with grace." The words landed like carefully placed explosives, designed to detonate my credibility before I could mount any defense. "I publicly forgive him for the erratic actions cognitive decline can cause." Nico continued, each word rehearsed, for maximum compassionate impact. "The stress of viral attention, the confusion about complex financial matters, these are symptoms we must treat with patience and professional care." He was doing exactly what Eugene's incapacity petition had outlined, framing himself as the compassionate son, protecting his declining father from his own deteriorating judgment. Preemptive narrative control delivered to 300 witnesses before I could speak a single word. "Our family will ensure he receives the professional care he deserves," Nico concluded, looking directly at me with manufactured concern that might have fooled everyone in the room who didn't know what we knew. I sat perfectly still, showing zero emotion, letting the performance complete itself. Craig's hand rested calmly on his laptop keyboard, waiting for the exact right moment. How does forgiveness sound when delivered through a microphone you stole before your victim could speak? Nico returned to his table, accepting polite applause from an audience that believed they'd just witnessed a touching family moment, a successful son publicly extending grace to his struggling father. Eugene nodded with satisfaction. The preemptive strike had landed. The narrative was set. The old man had been neutralized before he could embarrass himself or his family. Craig stood moving to the podium with the deliberate calm of an attorney who'd spent weeks preparing for this exact moment. "Thank you for attending the Invisible Vanguard Foundation's inaugural Gala," he said, voice carrying the professional distance of someone presenting evidence rather than telling a story. "Before we proceed with tonight's program, I'd like to share some context about how this foundation came to exist." He pressed a key on his laptop. The massive LED screen behind him illuminated with a document header, "Internal Communication, November 6th, 2023. The polite murmur of post-speech conversation died instantly. "Exhibit A," Craig said. "November 6th. Internal Communication, verified corporate digital signature." Nico's email filled the screen in large so every person in the ballroom could read it clearly. The corporate header, the timestamp, the digital signature authentication, all of it verified, official, irrefutable. "From Nico Saxon to Apex Brand Solutions. Subject podcast Final Cut approval. Date November 6th, 2023, 3:47 p.m. Directive reads." Craig continued, his voice cutting through the sudden silence like a surgeon's scalpel. "Leave the night janitor reference in. It creates perfect friction narrative. It's exactly the personal brand evolution that scales." The ballroom held its collective breath. 300 witnesses watching Nico's own words prove that his father's public humiliation hadn't been careless oversight or spontaneous podcast banter. It had been calculated strategy approved in writing 3 days before the episode aired. I watched Nico's face drain of color, watched Eugene's satisfied expression crumble into something between rage and panic, watched Saskia close her eyes as if she couldn't bear to witness what came next. "The metadata timestamp," Craig said, advancing to the next slide showing technical verification, "proves this directive was issued 3 days before the podcast aired. This was not reactive. This was premeditated brand strategy utilizing familial humiliation as commercial asset. 300 witnesses, 1 verified signature, 0 escape routes." The massive screen displayed every technical detail: digital signature authentication, corporate email, server logs, metadata, proving the message originated from Nico's verified account. No possibility of forgery, no room for claims of misunderstanding. My son had approved his father's public degradation as a calculated business decision, documented in corporate communications that would now become evidence in every legal filing, every media story, every national conversation about what Nico Saxon had actually built his success upon. Craig let the evidence sit on screen for 15 seconds, letting 300 pairs of eyes absorb what they were seeing, letting the reality settle into every witness present. Then he advanced to the next slide. Now let us examine what asset valuation this brand evolution was designed to thieve. Craig said, cursor hovering over financial documents, that would connect Nico's emotional exploitation to specific dollar amounts. The November 6th timestamp glowed in the projection's cold light. Nico's corporate signature burned into the retinas of business leaders, labor representatives, and national media who would carry this story far beyond any courtroom Eugene's money could influence. The financial revelation would transform moral outrage into criminal exposure, and Craig's cursor was already moving toward documents that would make that transformation devastatingly clear. Craig's hand moved to the next slide. The projection screen filled with a scanned document, its edges yellowed with age. December 2014. Craig said, his voice carrying across the silent ballroom, the Riddle Family Integrity Trust, established by Lester Charles Riddle with explicit parameters governing inheritance eligibility. I watched Nico's face from my position near the kitchen corridor. His expression had frozen into something between confusion and dawning horror. Section 4, subsection C. Craig continued highlighting text with a laser pointer. Beneficiary status shall be contingent upon maintenance of family surname and demonstrated adherence to principles of honor, integrity, and familial respect. Any heir who willfully abandons the family name or engages in public disparagement of the truster shall be deemed to have voluntarily forfeited all inheritance rights effective immediately upon such action. The room erupted. Reporters surged forward. Camera flashes created a strobe effect across the horrified faces at the head table. Nico Saxon, Craig, said, each word landing like a hammer blow, legally changed his surname from Riddle to Saxon on March 17th, 2022. This action, combined with the documented public humiliation of his father on September 28th, 2024, triggered automatic disqualification under trust parameters, established a full decade ago. Eugene was on his feet, but Craig raised his voice to override any objection. The trust deed contains no provision for appeal, no mechanism for reinstatement. Nico Saxon inherited nothing because by the time of activation he had already chosen to sever every legal and ethical connection the trust was designed to protect. I felt a strange lightness in my chest. Not satisfaction exactly, something quieter. The recognition that I had built protection into the foundation long before I knew I would need it. He committed inheritance suicide, someone whispered nearby. The phrase rippled through the crowd. Nico stood abruptly, his chair clattering backward. This is a fabrication. My father was mentally incompetent when... Which brings us, Craig interrupted smoothly, to the second exhibit. The screen changed again. November 21st, 2023. A document signed before Philip Norris, licensed notary public, witnessed by Douglas Hewitt of Pemberton Wealth Management. I recognized the form immediately. The settlement agreement Eugene had forced me to sign at the dining club. Affidavit of corporate interrogation and acknowledgement. Craig read from the header. Let me share several relevant sections. Before Craig reveals what Eugene actually said during that session, I want to address something directly. If you're listening to this story and finding yourself shocked by the layers of deception, leave a comment telling me which revelation hit hardest. Was it the email proving Nico's intentional cruelty, or this trust parameter showing he'd disqualified himself years earlier? Your perspective helps me understand what resonates. And remember, everything you're hearing actually happened, but I've changed names and some details to protect everyone involved, including myself. The screen now displayed Eugene's words, transcribed verbatim. You will sign this agreement today, or my client will initiate legal action that will consume every asset you possess. We have evidence of fraudulent trust manipulation, and we will deploy it through every available channel. Craig moved to the next section. If you contest this settlement in any form, we will ensure your employer terminates your position. We will freeze every account. We will make certain you die as destitute as you lived." The ballroom had gone absolutely silent. Even the reporters had stopped moving. "My client's reputation is worth more than your entire existence. Sign now, or learn exactly how thoroughly we can dismantle the legal fiction you've constructed." Craig looked directly at Eugene, who had gone pale. Every threat notarized and witnessed. Every extortion attempt documented under penalty of perjury. Mr. Mercer's firm specializes in asset protection litigation. They have represented corporate executives in 43 states. And this, he gestured at the screen, represents the most comprehensively documented extortion attempt in their institutional history. I saw Eugene grab his briefcase, already moving toward the exit. But before he could take 3 steps, a figure rose from a table near the back. Saskia Vance. She was wearing a navy suit, her dark hair pulled back severely. She looked nothing like the nervous associate I had seen outside Eugene's office building. "Excuse me," she said, her voice steady and clear. "I have something to add to this record." Every head turned. Eugene froze mid-step. Saskia walked toward the microphone, her heels clicking on the polished floor. Craig stepped aside without hesitation, as if this interruption had been choreographed. "My name is Saskia Vance," she said into the microphone. "Until 4 days ago, I was a junior associate at Saxon and Rothstein, LLP. I worked directly under Eugene Saxon on the Saxon matter." Eugene's expression shifted from panic to something colder, calculating. "I have in my possession," Saskia continued, pulling a flash drive from her pocket and holding it up, "encrypted chat logs, billing records, and internal strategy documents that will provide context for everything you've seen tonight, including communications discussing the deliberate fabrication of evidence, planned witness intimidation, and Eugene's personal knowledge that every legal threat he made against Lester Riddle was based on claims he knew to be false." The room exploded. Reporters shouted questions. Eugene started pushing toward the exit, but 2 men I recognized from Veronica's firm moved to block the doorway. Nico stood motionless at the head table, his face drained of color. Saskia looked directly at me for the first time. Something passed between us. Not quite an apology, more like recognition. One person who had found the courage to step out of a shadow, acknowledging another who had done the same. "Mr. Craig," she said, turning back to him, "I'm prepared to provide sworn testimony regarding the entirety of the Saxon legal strategy, including evidence that may be relevant to Bar Association ethics proceedings. Would this venue be appropriate, or should I coordinate with your office directly?" Craig's smile was professionally neutral, but I saw the satisfaction beneath it. "I believe everyone here would benefit from your testimony. Ms. Saxon, please continue." Saskia gripped the microphone with both hands, steadying herself against the weight of what she was about to do. Camera flashes created a continuous strobe effect across her face. I could see her jaw trembling. "I need to provide context," she said, her voice stronger than I expected. "For the past 18 months, I worked under Eugene Mercer, documenting the Saxon legal strategy. What I witnessed was not advocacy. It was systematic manipulation, orchestrated by a father weaponizing his own son." The ballroom went absolutely silent. "Eugene wrote every word of that forgiveness speech," Saskia continued. "Nico was reading his father's script. I have text archives proving explicit directives." She pulled out her phone, projecting messages onto the screen behind her. "November 18th, 8:47 a.m. Position yourself as compassionate son protecting senile father. Manufacture emotional credibility. Investors value narrative control." I watched Nico's face drain of color. He was staring at Eugene, confusion shifting into something harder to name. Saskia scrolled to another message. "November 19th. The podcast humiliation was necessary foundation. You converted poverty into brand differentiation. Now convert concern into inheritance access. This is basic investor psychology." "Stop," Eugene said, his voice tight. "You are violating attorney-client—" "I was never Nico's attorney," Saskia interrupted. "I was yours. And these communications document your personal strategy to manipulate your biological son into destroying his relationship with his father for asset acquisition purposes you designed." The twist hit the room like physical force. Eugene had orchestrated everything: the podcast, the public humiliation, the forgiveness speech. Nico had been performing a script written by his own father. "You are dead to this family," Eugene shouted, his professional composure finally shattering. "You have ruined everything we built." "You built nothing," Saskia said quietly. "You built a fraud on top of a son who trusted you." She stepped away from the microphone. Craig moved to escort her toward our table, where legal protection waited. I felt the weight of 300 pairs of eyes shift toward me. The kitchen corridor where I had spent the evening suddenly felt very far away. Craig gestured toward the microphone. "Mr. Riddle, would you like to address the assembly?" I had not planned to speak. 40 years of silence purchased with dignity, broken in 3 sentences. But I walked slowly toward center stage, my clean suit, feeling foreign against skin more accustomed to work uniforms. The microphone felt cold against my palm. The ballroom smelled of expensive cologne and fresh panic. "My name is Lester Charles Riddle," I said. My voice sounded steadier than I felt. "I am 68 years old. For the past 40 years I have worked night maintenance at Aurora Summit Center, and I have never been poor." The confused silence was immediate. In December 2014, I established a $38 million trust as a promise to my late wife. She believed wealth should only lift up people who keep this city running after midnight. Janitors, security guards, overnight nurses, people whose work becomes invisible the moment daylight arrives. I looked directly at Nico. He was gripping the table edge, his knuckles white. "I chose to live as a custodian because dignity is not measured by bank statements," I continued. "My wife understood that. She made me promise to use our combined inheritance to create something that would outlast us both, a foundation that would fund education, healthcare, housing, but only for working people. Never for hedge fund executives, never for venture capital consultants, never for sons who convert their fathers into inventory." The ballroom had gone completely still. Even the reporters had stopped moving. "A name is not a brand to be optimized, son," I said, my voice quiet but caring. "You did not insult me on that podcast. You merely converted your own father into cheap inventory to sell to a room full of arrogant men who measure human worth in capital allocation efficiency." I pulled a document from my jacket pocket. "This is a formal offer. You can reclaim the name Riddle and rebuild your relationship with truth. Or you can maintain the Saxon facade and inherit exactly what you have already chosen, a world of illusions where your father wrote your forgiveness speech, and your credibility died on a stage in front of 300 witnesses. I set the document on the podium and stepped back. Nico sat frozen, his mouth slightly open. Behind him, Eugene was already moving toward the exit, his briefcase clutched tight. Then Kai Lindsay stood, the co-founder I had met in the parking garage. He walked calmly to the press table and handed a thick folder to a reporter wearing a Wall Street Journal credential. "Complete fraud file," Kai said, his voice carrying across the ballroom. 3 years of fraudulent capitalization misrepresentations. Nico Saxon built his entire startup valuation on manufactured metrics and fabricated social capital. Every institutional investor in this room was sold a brand story, built on exploiting poverty that never existed. The room erupted. Reporters surged forward. Camera flashes created a blinding rhythm. What does a man have left when he has liquidated his father, his name, and his credibility for a lie? I watched the answer unfold in real time. Robert Thornton, a 62-year-old lead institutional venture capitalist from Elevation Partners, stood slowly from a VIP table. He buttoned his suit jacket with deliberate precision. Then he walked toward the exit without a word. 3 other investors stood immediately and followed. Then 6 more. Then 12. Thornton paused at the doorway long enough to look back at Nico. "We invest in real metrics, kid," he said, his voice carrying cold contempt. "Not in sociopaths who liquidate their own fathers for clout." The exodus accelerated. Within 90 seconds, every major institutional investor had left the ballroom. Nico's phone began flashing. Emergency notifications lit the screen in continuous rhythm. Board investigation alerts, investor withdrawal notices, legal hold notifications. He stared at his hands. The same hands that had signed the name change decree recorded. The podcast accepted Eugene's script. His corporate phone flashed with demands for explanations he could not provide. "What have I done?" he whispered. The microphone caught it, broadcasting the question across the ballroom. "What have I completely thrown away?" I stood at the podium watching my son compute the full scope of his choices. Across the emptying room, Saskia sat beside Craig, her testimony complete. Craig gathered documents, methodically preparing the next phase. The aftermath would require choosing between redemption and total ruin. And for the first time in 40 years, that choice belonged entirely to my son. The dimly lit hallway behind the ballroom stage smelled of concrete dampness and decades-old paint. I heard footsteps running behind me, then hysterical sobbing that echoed off the cinder block walls. "Dad, please!" Nico gasped, catching up to me near the loading dock exit. His face was blotchy with tears, his expensive suit jacket rumpled. "Please, I need you to forgive me. I need you to tell them this was all a misunderstanding." I turned to face him. His hands were shaking. "Tell me something," I said quietly. "If there was no 38 million waiting in that safe, would you drop the Saxon name and reclaim Riddle tonight?" He opened his mouth, closed it. His eyes darted away, computing. I would need time to think about the optics," he finally said. "The brand transition requires strategic messaging. Investor confidence depends on—" "Stop," I said. The word landed with enough force that he actually stepped backward. "You are still calculating," I continued. "Even now, with your empire collapsing around you, you are running cost-benefit analysis on whether genuine remorse serves your strategic positioning." "That's not fair," he whispered. "I came here to apologize. I came here to make things right." "No," I said. "You came here to execute damage control. There is a difference between remorse and risk mitigation, son. One transforms you. The other simply rebrands the same hollow calculation that brought you to this hallway." I could see him fighting for composure, his hands clenched and unclenched at his sides. "What do you want from me?" he asked, his voice breaking. "Tell me what I need to do. Give me the script. I'll follow it exactly. How do you forgive someone who is still calculating the return on their apology?" I looked at my son, 34 years old, Stanford MBA venture capital. Darling standing in a concrete hallway, begging for forgiveness he had not yet earned because he could not stop treating human connection like negotiable equity. A cheap apology is simply another transaction to you," I said. "True remorse is a long, difficult path, not a singular press release." He reached toward me. I stepped back. "I need time to think," I said, "and you need time to discover whether you are capable of choosing truth over strategy." I left him standing in that hallway, his sobs echoing off walls that had absorbed 40 years of my midnight shifts. The loading dock door closed with a heavy metallic clang. Craig was waiting, in his car engine running. We drove in silence through empty Denver streets toward his office. The next morning, November the 28th, I sat across from Craig at his mahogany desk. The office smelled of leather and old paper. Through the window, early sunlight cut sharp angles across downtown buildings, where night shift janitors were finishing their last rounds. "The structural reallocation is ready for execution," Craig said, sliding documents toward me. "This formalizes Nico's status as temporarily suspended from all lineage benefits due to willful dishonor." I read the language carefully. Legal terminology had a precision I appreciated. "Temporarily," I said. "You specified a pathway," Craig confirmed. 12 months. Measurable actions, not performative gestures. If he satisfies the requirements by November 28th, 2025, his standing can be restored. The twist was deliberate. I was not disowning my son. I was offering him something harder than rejection. I was offering him actual accountability, with genuine consequences and real possibility of redemption. "The primary trust capital?" I asked. "Permanently insulated from corporate takeover," Craig said. "Fully locked to fund the Night Shift Community Foundation. Regardless of whether Nico completes the restoration pathway, those assets serve the purpose your wife intended. Janitors, security guards, overnight nurses, people whose work disappears at sunrise." I signed the documents with a pen Craig's grandfather had used to incorporate the firm in 1947. The weight felt appropriate. "The honor restoration pathway requirements," Craig said, pulling a heavy wax-sealed manila envelope from his desk drawer. "Specific measurable actions, public community service, financial transparency audits, formal name restoration to Riddle, 12 months of choices nobody will photograph or monetize." He set the envelope on the desk between us. The red wax seal bore my wife's family, crest an oak tree with roots as deep as branches were high. "He has to want transformation more than he wants the inheritance," I said. The requirements ensure that First Craig confirmed. There is no shortcut. No PR firm can manufacture compliance. Either he genuinely changes, or he proves he cannot. I touched the envelope. The paper felt thick and expensive against my calloused fingers. Inside was either my son's salvation or his final proof that some men prefer comfortable lies to uncomfortable truth. Redemption does not arrive in press releases, it arrives in 12 months of unwitnessed choices. Deliver this to his residence, I said, sliding the envelope across the polished desk. Let us see if he values his soul more than his public relations strategy. Craig accepted the envelope with both hands, treating it with the gravity it deserved. And if he fails, then the foundation serves those who never forgot the value of invisible work, I said, and my son learns that some inheritances cannot be manipulated, only earned. I stood. Through Craig's window I could see Aurora Summit Center in the distance. My shift started in 11 hours. The floors would not clean themselves. The deadline is absolute, Craig said, making a note in his legal pad. November 28th, 2025. 365 days to prove whether strategic positioning matters more than authentic transformation. Send me copies of the Foundation Charter, I said. I want to review the fund distribution mechanisms before we announce the structure. Craig nodded. The paperwork will require one more signature, the formal transfer, designating Foundation governance. I will prepare those documents for next week. I shook his hand. His grip was firm and professional. Outside Denver, morning traffic was building toward rush hour. Somewhere in a high-rise apartment, my son was probably staring at his shattered phone computing damage control scenarios. In 12 months, we would discover whether he had learned to compute something more valuable than asset optimization. Craig held the wax-sealed envelope containing my son's last chance at redemption. The November 2024 deadline was carved in legal stone. Inside those pages was a father's measured mercy, not forgiveness, but the structured possibility of earning it through actions that could not be branded, monetized, or converted into investor confidence metrics. Craig called me 3 hours after delivering the envelope. The wax seal had broken with a sharp crack under Nico's thumb, he told me. My son had read all 4 conditions twice before speaking. I had written those conditions carefully, each one designed not to punish, but to dismantle the manufactured identity, brick by brick, until only authentic foundation remained. Condition 1. Issue public unredacted written apology via all media channels, where the insult occurred. No PR firm editing, no strategic messaging consultation. Raw acknowledgement of deliberate cruelty for calculated investor optics. Condition 2. Legally restore birth surname Riddle across all official documentation, driver's license, business registration, LinkedIn profile. Every place the Saxon rebrand had erased family connection. Condition 3. Complete 1 full calendar year of uncompensated manual logistics service for the Foundation, working exclusively midnight to dawn terminal shift at Denver Union Station. The same floors I'd cleaned for 40 years, the same hours invisible workers knew intimately. Condition 4. Fully return all stolen equity and back pay to Kai Lindsay. The co-founder Nico had systematically erased from corporate narrative and cap table records. Craig said Saskia had been present when Nico read the document. She had gone pale at condition 3. They want you scrubbing floors like your father for 12 months, she had asked. Nico had not answered immediately. He had walked to their apartment window. They had moved from the high-rise to a small leased unit in Capitol Hill after investor funds evaporated. The view showed ordinary street traffic instead of mountain panoramas. If I am ever going to find out who I actually am, Nico had finally said, his voice quiet, I have to start on the floor tonight. Craig relayed this conversation to me over bitter coffee in his office. I could taste the acidity lingering on my tongue as I processed my son's response. 12 months of midnight floors, the exact sentence I had chosen voluntarily for 40 years. The difference was I had never needed redemption. I had simply understood that dignity lived in honest work, not manufactured prestige. Nico would have to learn that truth through calloused hands and aching shoulders, and the profound anonymity of cleaning spaces while the city slept. He asked when he should start, Craig said. I told him December 2nd. That gives him 4 days to file the legal name change reversal and draft the public apology. I nodded. 4 days was tight, but manageable. Either my son was serious about transformation, or he would fail in the first week and prove the conditions were beyond his authentic capacity. December 2nd arrived with early winter cold. I was preparing for my own shift when Craig sent me a link to a private live stream. Eugene Mercer's corporate board had called an emergency meeting. I watched on my phone from the Aurora Summit Center break room. The screen showed 12 board members in a video conference grid, their faces professionally neutral. Eugene sat in the center square, his expression already defensive. This narrative is a fabricated smear campaign by a bitter family member seeking vindictive. Eugene started. A board member cut him off. I recognized the voice, Elizabeth Hartwell, General Counsel for the firm's largest institutional investor. We have a certified notarized affidavit documenting your explicit extortion demands. Eugene, she said, signed before a licensed notary, witnessed by a trust officer from Pemberton Wealth Management. Philip Norris has confirmed the document's authenticity under penalty of perjury. Eugene's face went rigid. The context of that document, the context is unambiguous. Another board member interrupted. You threatened a 68-year-old janitor with financial destruction. Unless he signed over assets your client had already disqualified himself from inheriting. You documented systematic fraud. You weaponized your own son for asset acquisition. The vote took 12 minutes. Unanimous decision to strip Eugene of his chairman's seat and completely sever all capital relations with his fund. How does old money prestige sound when it is stripped by unanimous vote in 12 minutes? I watched Eugene's square go dark as he disconnected from the call. The board continued without him already discussing transition protocols and damage control messaging. 40 years of reputation architecture demolished in the time it takes to clean 3 office suites. I turned off my phone and started my own shift. The floors in Section C needed attention. Someone had spilled coffee near the elevator bank, and the smell of stale espresso lingered in the hallway. Later that night, Craig sent me a photograph. Nico standing in front of a bathroom mirror, wearing a dark blue utility uniform. The fabric looked stiff and new against his shoulders. His expression was unreadable. The text below the image read, Saskia took this. He asked her to document the first night, not for social media, for himself. His shift starts in 20 minutes. I stared at the photograph for a long moment. My son looked younger somehow. Stripped of tailored suits and strategic positioning, he looked like the boy who used to help me carry grocery bags up apartment stairs before business school taught him to optimize human connection into transactional equity. I did not reply to Craig's message. Words felt insufficient. Instead, I finished cleaning. Section C emptied the trash from the executive suites and restocked paper towels in the third-floor restrooms. Familiar work, honest work, the kind of work that did not require performance or audience. Somewhere across Denver, my son was learning the same lesson. Mop in hand, bucket beside him, no cameras recording his transformation for investor pitch decks. The foundation transfer documents sat on Craig's desk awaiting my final signature. One more legal formality to ensure the wealth built on dignity now served those who had always understood its value. But tonight, the most important signature was the one my son made by showing up 33 minutes before midnight. On December 2nd, wearing utility blues instead of cashmere, choosing authentic work over calculated performance. I did not know yet if he would last 12 months. I did not know if genuine transformation was within his capacity. But for the first time since that podcast aired, I felt something that resembled cautious hope. Nico had buttoned that uniform and walked out his apartment door. The Denver Union Station terminal floors were waiting. The same floors that had taught me everything worth knowing about human worth and invisible dignity. Now they would teach my son. And unlike Stanford's MBA curriculum, this education could not be purchased, manipulated, or converted into strategic advantage. It could only be earned one midnight shift at a time. The cold limestone concourse at Denver Union Station vibrated with the mechanical hum of the industrial floor scrubber. I watched my son grip the heavy metal frame with hands already blistering after 90 minutes of work. December 3rd, 1:20 in the morning, his first real shift. A businessman in an expensive overcoat walked past Nico without making eye contact. Then a nurse heading home from a double shift. Then a college student with headphones. 12 people crossed the concourse in 5 minutes, and not one looked at my son's face. Complete invisibility. The same invisibility I had worn like a uniform for 40 years. Nico stumbled as the scrubber hit an uneven joint in the floor. The machine weighed 80 pounds dry, closer to 120, with a full solution tank. Stanford's gym membership had not prepared him for industrial equipment, designed for endurance, not aesthetics. I walked across the concourse carrying a spray bottle and cloths. When I reached him, I pointed toward the floor near the ticket counter. "You missed a patch there," I said quietly. "Oil 3 feet left." He looked where I indicated, then nodded. No argument, no excuse. He maneuvered the scrubber back to address the spot. Gloria, the veteran overnight custodian who had worked this terminal for 16 years, appeared with 2 thermoses of coffee. She handed one to me, then walked toward Nico. "What's your name, kid?" she asked, offering him the second thermos. Nico straightened slowly, his lower back clearly aching. He looked at the thermos, then at Gloria's face, then at me standing 30 feet away. "My name," he said, his voice steady despite exhaustion. "My name is Nico." Gloria smiled. "Well, Nico, you are doing better than most first-nighters. Keep your knees bent when you push, or your back will hate you by dawn." She walked away toward the east platform. Nico took a sip of the coffee, bitter and strong. Nothing like the artisanal espresso his venture capital meetings had served. I saw him wince at the taste, then take another sip anyway. How long does it take to learn invisibility? 1 shift, 1 week, 40 years. 7 days later, I stood in the shadows outside the Foundation's Educational Center community room. Through the doorway, I could see 40 people seated in folding chairs, janitors, security guards, overnight nurses, and their children, teenagers who would receive the first round of scholarships. Tanya Henderson sat in the front row, her recording equipment off. This was not a story for viral metrics. Nico walked to the small podium. No PR handlers, no corporate script. His hands still showed calluses from a week of floor work. "Good evening," he said into the microphone. "My name is Nico Riddle, and I proudly bear the surname of my father." The room went completely silent. "These scholarships honor the families who keep the city running after midnight," he continued. "People whose work becomes invisible the moment daylight arrives. People whose dignity I failed to recognize until I stood in their shoes." He paused, looking at the teenagers in the third row. "No explanations, no excuses. Just the name I should never have abandoned, and a commitment to ensure your education is never held hostage by people who measure human worth in capital allocation efficiency." I felt my eyes misting. My expression remained disciplined, but something in my chest loosened. 40 years of holding a promise to my wife, and now watching my son begin to understand why that promise mattered. He read the first scholarship recipient's name, a 17-year-old girl whose mother cleaned office buildings in the financial district, walked forward with tears streaming down her face. Full tuition to community college, plus housing stipend, plus emergency family support fund. 12 more names, 12 more futures secured. January 5th arrived with bitter cold. 2 in the morning, the platform temperature reading showed 18 degrees. My breath formed clouds in the air as I emptied trash receptacles near track 7. Nico worked 30 feet away, operating a parallel cleaning unit with steady, practiced rhythm. 1 month complete, 11 remaining. His hands had toughened, his movements had become efficient, and the shame that had weighed on his shoulders in early December had transformed into something quieter. Focus, purpose. A young commuter waiting for the late Amtrak connection watched us work for a moment, then looked away. We had become part of the terminal's infrastructure, visible only when something went wrong. I walked over to where Nico was coiling an extension cord. He looked up as I approached. "You could retire tomorrow," he said quietly. "You control the entire trust now. Why do you still work this shift?" I looked out at the empty platform where winter trains would soon arrive. "Your mother made me promise something," I said. "Not just to create the foundation, to remain anchored alongside the people it serves. Wealth corrupts when it separates you from the ground where dignity lives. I work this shift because it keeps me honest." Calloused hands working side by side, the only inheritance that ever mattered. Nico nodded slowly. He did not fully understand yet, but he would. 11 more months of midnight floors would teach him what business school never could. I placed my hand on his shoulder, firm, warm, the kind of touch that carried 40 years of hard-won wisdom. 1 month down, son, I said. "Now let your actions do the talking for the next 11. We returned to our work as the 2:15 express rolled into the station. Passengers disembarked, walking past us without recognition. We cleaned the platform after they departed, removing scattered newspapers and empty coffee cups. The night air smelled of diesel fuel and industrial cleaning solution. My shoulders ached with familiar fatigue. Beside me, my son moved with growing confidence, no longer performing labor, but inhabiting it. He had stood before 40 families and reclaimed the name he had abandoned. He had experienced the complete social invisibility his podcast had weaponized. He had learned that dignity was not performed for audiences. It was earned in unwitnessed hours when nobody was calculating return on investment. The trains departed into winter darkness. We worked in synchronized rhythm across floors that had witnessed 4 decades of my quiet persistence and 1 month of my son's authentic transformation. Names are not meant to be flaunted in boardrooms or optimized for investor optics. Names are meant to be lived with honor on the ground. And you listening to my story, remember this. For 40 years, I held my wife's promise, close to my heart, working midnight shifts while protecting wealth, meant for those who understood its true value. My greatest mistake wasn't keeping the secret. It was waiting so long to teach my son that dignity cannot be measured in bank statements or investor pitches. Don't make my mistake of assuming silence will teach louder than honest conversation. Family betrayal. Revenge comes in many forms. Some people seek destruction. I chose transformation. When your family betrays you, the sweetest revenge isn't watching them fall. It's offering them a ladder back up and seeing if they have the courage to climb. I believe God put me through this trial, not to break me, but to show my son what real wealth looks like: calloused hands, honest labor, and a name lived with honor on the ground. That's the kind of family betrayal, revenge, that heals instead of destroys. If this story touched you, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Have you faced family betrayal? What would your revenge look like? Transformation or destruction? Your perspective matters. If you know someone who needs to hear this message, please share it with them. And if you want more stories about turning pain into purpose, subscribe to Dad's Sweet Revenge. We're building a community of people who choose dignity over bitterness. Thank you for staying with me until the very end. Your time is precious, and I'm honored you spent it here. One final note. While the core truth of this story is real, certain details and names have been changed for storytelling purposes and privacy. What matters most is the lesson it carries, and I hope it stays with you.